got it! Two treasure seekers are digging frozen ground in a cornfield at night. It's raining hard, lightning is flashing, but these two guys keep working. And now the shovel hits something solid. No way! A treasure chest! They start digging faster and find a piece of a ship's engine. What the? Far from the seas and lakes, somewhere under the fields of Kansas City, they found a giant sunken ship. How is this possible? Now you'll see. Some people spend their lives searching for shipwrecks with treasures underground. One of them is explorer David Hawley. He's been looking for such ships far from the seas, rivers, and oceans for many years. He does this because he likes the feeling of adventure. The holds of these ships may contain chests of gold, antiques, and artifacts. And you can get a lot of money for them. David says you don't have to go into the ocean to find a sunken ship. They may be lying in your backyard. But why do ships end up buried underground among fields, farms, and plains? Let's find out using the example of steamboat Great White Arabia. According to old records, the newspaper clippings, this ship had been carrying about 200 tons of treasure before it sank in 1856. Many rumors and local legends said the ship was lying underground a few miles northeast of Kansas City. It was there because people deliberately altered the riverbed and channels of the Missouri River in the second half of the 19th century. They artificially brought the shores closer to each other. They narrowed the river to increase the flow's speed, so boats could sail much faster. In the 19th century, steamboats were the most popular means of transporting passengers and goods. Before railroads, they extended the western border across the Mississippi and Missouri rivers and brought supplies to people. That's why it was so important to increase the speed of their movement. So, on September 5, 1856, Arabia was sailing along such an estuary. It came across a snag sticking out of the water. A piece of log quickly flooded the ship. Fortunately, all passengers were evacuated. But the steamer and its precious cargo reached the silt bottom of the Missouri River in a few minutes. Several years had passed. Everyone forgot about the vessel. During this time, the course of the Missouri River had changed. But Arabia remained under the wet, muddy bottom. The soil level above it was getting higher, and the ground was losing moisture. Eventually, many decades later, a cornfield formed above the sunken ship. In the 1980s, one farmer owned this area, and he had no idea what was hidden in his territory. David Hawley carefully studied the history of the sunken ships of the USA. He knew that hundreds of steamers had gone underwater all over Missouri, but most of all, he was interested in Arabia, as there were rumors that it was filled with gold and other valuable things. The territory of cornfields in Kansas was vast, but David Hawley knew how to search properly. In 1987, he started working. First, together with his brother and father, they collected all the clippings from old newspapers they could find. They were looking not only for information about the steamer, but also for maps of the Missouri River. They tracked its historical changes, checked the dates, and identified a large area where the steamer sank. Next, they used electromagnetic testing and other geological stuff to study the soil and find the right place. They searched for differences in ground moisture and density. Then, they went through the territory with powerful metal detectors. And so, by the fall of 1988, they had determined the location of the steamer. Arabia was the size of a football field. This gigantic vessel lay 45 feet underground, 4 stories down. But before they started excavating, they had to ask the owner of the cornfield for permission. For the farmer, this news was a big surprise. He agreed, on the condition that the excavations would be completed by spring so that he could sow a new crop. Digging a giant ship in winter is much more difficult and expensive than at other times. It includes additional equipment, electricity, and heating costs. The team worked day and night. They financed the excavations out of their own pocket. Each invested more than $10,000 and took out a bank loan. Finally, they noticed the first details of the ship. The shovels hit the huge engine boilers and the deck. The goal had been achieved. Most of the cargo lying inside the sunken ships is covered with rust, shells, mud, and is badly damaged. The contents of Arabia were in excellent condition, considering that the ship had sunk 130 years prior. Unfortunately, they didn't find the chests of gold. Still, they got several tons of other valuable cargo, household items of people who lived in the middle of the 19th century. It was a time capsule. The ship was carrying supplies for hundreds and thousands of people, and all these things were perfectly preserved. For example, they could clearly see the brand stamp Goodyear Rubber Company on one rubber shoe. The longer the excavations continued, the more things David and his team found. In the barrels, they found plates from the 19th century. They were intact and usable. Also, there were clean clothes, thousands of pairs of shoes, harpoons, frying pans, and umbrellas. The ship was carrying cargo to supply about 16 small towns. Yes, it's not gold, but such artifacts are also precious. The contents of the ship could be worth millions. However, the crew wasn't going to sell these things. They made a museum on the site of a former fruit market in Kansas City. If you go there, you will immediately feel like you're in a department store of the 19th century. There are thousands of items in good condition. Even the matches here are dry enough to light up. It took David many years to present the entire collection from the steamship. He values each of the items and doesn't want to sell them. Anyone can come here, pay for a ticket, and find themselves in the past. Who knows, maybe there's an old ship hidden in your backyard too. Geologists found an older vessel in the hot desert of Namibia in 2008. This ship sailed back in the days when pirates scared sailors on the seas, and now it's inside a dried-up lagoon. The ship sailed from Lisbon in 1533 and disappeared with the crew near a small diamond mining town. After almost 500 years, the hull had been badly damaged. Only the carcass of the ship remained, but the treasure hidden inside the vessel stayed intact. They carefully studied the boat for a long time, trying not to ruin anything. And then, 5 days later, they found a big old chest in the hold. Carefully opening it, they found gold coins there. Thus, the cost of the ship was estimated at about $10 million. The exact cause of the shipwreck is unknown, but experts believe the ship was destroyed by heavy cargo and bad weather. It went to the bottom of a lagoon that later became a desert. Some find an airplane in their backyard, others discover a ship, and one man found a passage to an ancient secret city in his house. This happened in Turkey in 1963. The owners of the building decided to make repairs. He went to his basement and knocked down the wall to turn this place into a living room. And so, behind one wall, he found a tunnel leading underground. The man thought it was some kind of a secret chamber. He went down there and realized it was something much more than that. It was an ancient city 18 floors deep. People built it in the years 780 to 1180 as a refuge from weather disasters and the invasion of enemies. This place also includes many underground tunnels that stretch for several miles in different directions. People could get to the town from different points using secret passages leading to these roads. The city can accommodate about 20,000 residents, livestock, and tons of food supplies. Archaeologists have also found a chapel, schools, stables, and public kitchens there. As an experienced sailor and the first man to ever sail non-stop on his own around North and South America, Matt Rutherford has seen a lot during his voyages. But what he saw in 2013 while sailing through the waters of the Atlantic with his colleague surely stands out. Some 800 miles off the coast of Bermuda, not far away from the famous Bermuda Triangle, they noticed a boat that seemed to be moving by itself. The sails weren't up and the motor wasn't running. The sailors decided to check if there was someone who needed their help aboard, so they moved closer to the mysterious ship. Once they got there, things only got weirder, as they realized there wasn't a living soul aboard. Rutherford started filming to document their discovery. The boat looked so awfully abandoned that they expected to find some pretty scary things in there. But it didn't stop Rutherford from searching the vessel. The boat, which turned out to be named Wolfhound, looked like an upscale one, probably costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was pretty weird to find it floating by itself in the middle of the ocean. It seemed like whoever abandoned it was leaving in a rush. There were clothes and other personal belongings all over the main cabin. Some parts of the ceiling had fallen and some drawers had popped open. The brave sailors decided to tow the ghost ship back to Bermuda. It wasn't easy because Wolfhound was bigger and heavier than their boat. After days at sea, the crew was running low on fuel and asked a passing freighter to stop and give them some gas. They kept pulling Wolfhound until the tow line got wrapped around the rudder and they realized they could get stranded in the Bermuda Triangle. So they had to abandon the ship. What really happened and how Wolfhound ended up in the middle of the ocean will probably remain a mystery. Rumor has it that it belonged to a member of the Royal Irish Yacht Club. The ship was going on its first voyage from Connecticut to Bermuda and then Antigua. It got in a terrible storm around 400 miles away from Delaware. The winds were so strong that the yacht suffered 2 knockdowns. A Greek cargo ship rescued the crew. They left the ship with an emergency beacon on. The rescued crew members shared that they saw the ship sink, which only adds more questions to the story. How did it get back to the surface? Does the Bermuda Triangle have anything to do with that? Christopher Columbus himself reported some unusual compass activity going on in this mysterious area while he was on his way to the New World. Despite the stories of more than 50 ships and 20 planes disappearing in the area, it remains one of the most heavily traveled shipping routes in the world. Some skeptics believe that this fact solves the Bermuda Triangle mystery. It could make sense because the busier the area, the more accidents happen there. But then again, it's not the number of disappearances that makes the place so mysterious. It's the lack of explanation and wreckage lost for good. The first ever confirmed ship to vanish in the Bermuda Triangle was the USS Pickering. In 1800, it departed from the US on its way to the West Indies. The ship sailed into the Bermuda Triangle along with its 90-man crew. No one ever heard anything from them ever since. The popular explanation is that the ship was taken out by a storm. But because no one found any wreckage, we'll never know for sure. The largest ship that has ever disappeared in this mysterious area was the USS Cyclops. In March 1918, carrying a crew of 306 people, the USS Cyclops left Barbados and headed home to Baltimore. The ship passed through the Bermuda Triangle on its journey and vanished into thin air, or rather, water. The Cyclops never sent any distress signal and disappeared without any explanation or trace. The Bermuda Triangle isn't the only place in the world where ships go missing or mysteriously resurface. One of the most famous ghost ship stories would be of SS Baychimo. The large cargo steamer was built in Sweden. On October 1st, 1931, it got caught in pack ice. The crew decided to wait it out and managed to break free after a couple of days, only to get trapped again in less than a week. This time, they didn't manage to make it out. A rescue team went by air to save 22 of the crew members. 15 other members stayed in a wooden shelter they built not far away from the ship. Their plan was to wait out the winter and get back aboard. At the end of November, a strong blizzard was rushing through the area. When it was over, Baychimo seemed to have gone away with the storm. The captain decided it must have broken and sunk. But a few days later, a local hunter informed them that he had seen the ship around 45 miles away from their camp. The crew managed to find the ship and took the most valuable cargo from its hold. They had fears that Baychimo wouldn't live through that rough water, but it did manage to survive after all. Once the ice was gone, it floated away and ended up drifting along the shores of Canada and Alaska. Many people reported seeing the ghost ship in an open sea. Some even tried to board it to save the ship, but the weather didn't allow it to happen. The last time someone saw SS Baychimo was in 1969, 38 years after its crew had left it. It could still be drifting somewhere in the ocean. The story of MV Hoita happened in the South Pacific. The ship was originally a wooden luxury yacht. After serving for 20 years to various owners, it became a merchant ship. In 1959, it set on a trading voyage that was supposed to last around 2 days. When it didn't reach its destination on time, no one was worried at first, as things happen in the open waters. After another day, and no distress signals from the Hoita, it was obvious that something serious was going on with it. There were 25 people aboard, and their families wanted to find them. A search and rescue crew worked for 6 days looking for the ship, or at least its wreckage, in an area of nearly 100,000 square miles. That's 1.5 times as big as Florida. Sadly, the mission had come back with no results. It seemed like Hoita had disappeared without a trace. A month later, another merchant ship noticed Hoita drifting in the ocean, miles and miles away from its original route, and none of the crew members or passengers were on board. The cargo had also disappeared. The lifeboats were also gone, so the people must have escaped the ship hoping to save themselves. It turned out that the crew had been trying to get help as they tuned the radio to the International Distress Channel. But the damaged cable didn't let them send the signal any further than 2 miles. It also looked like when they were leaving the ship, the crew took the logbook with them, and we still don't know what exactly happened to Hoita. Family members of those who were on board are still looking for answers. One professor claims it must have been a corroded pipe that leaked and flooded the vessel, but we'll most likely never know for sure. In the Pacific Ocean, near Japan, there is an area nicknamed the Devil's Sea. It's believed to be one of the 12 vile vortices around the Earth. Some people claim that vile vortices have weird things going on in them because the pull of the planet's electromagnetic waves is stronger there than anywhere else. The most famous ship that disappeared in the area was a fishery patrol vessel in 1952. The ship went there to investigate the vessels that went missing previously and disappeared along with 31 crew members. Scientists who don't believe it was a mysterious disappearance blame the underwater volcano eruption for what happened.
They said it was the most technologically advanced ship. They said it was unsinkable. And when it sank, they made a movie about it. These were the main reasons why the Titanic disaster became world famous. But unfortunately, this is not the only large-scale shipwreck. And sadly, there have been cases much worse than the tragedy of the Titanic. One of them occurred on April 27, 1865. The Sultana steamboat carried passengers and cargo daily between St. Louis and New Orleans. It was a pretty large wooden boat with 3 decks and was 260 feet long and 70 feet wide, almost twice the size of a basketball court. The ship could carry about 350 passengers, but on that unfortunate day, more than 2,000 people were on it. On April 23rd, she was making a routine voyage from New Orleans when it broke down. Something was wrong with the boiler, so the vessel docked in Vicksburg for repairs. At the port, the ship's captain, James Cass Mason, found out about an excellent opportunity to earn a lot of money. All he needed to do was to transfer a large group of former prisoners to the north. The captain agreed to do it, but the problem was that the boiler required a lot of time to repair. Mason was afraid that his competitors would take the job, so he decided to sail despite the malfunction the ship had. He patched up the holes in the boiler instead of a big repair and invited all the ex-prisoners on board. So, there was a broken boiler, an excess number of passengers, a lack of lifeboats, and not the best river conditions. Also, the captain refused to send the ex-prisoners to the hold, so they were all with ordinary passengers. There were strong chances for a shipwreck, but the greedy desire to earn more money was stronger. The Sultana went on a voyage and sailed up the river for 2 days. At this time, one of the biggest Mississippi floods in history began. The river overflowed its shores because of the flood, with the water level rising several feet. All the trees on the shore disappeared, and only the tops were sticking out of the water. The ship sailed opposite this powerful current, making the boiler work too hard. On the evening of April 26th, the Sultana arrived in Memphis, Tennessee, and they loaded even more, 120 tons of sugar and 200 passengers. She got incredibly heavy. Around midnight, the ship continued its dangerous journey. The captain sailed to barges to load a shipment of coal. At 1 a.m., the vessel left the barge. At 2 a.m., the broken boiler, unable to withstand the load, suddenly exploded. The Sultana was just 7 miles north of Memphis. Few people survived that day. The problem was that passengers trying to escape from the fire jumped into a cold river with a strong current. The Sultana disaster is considered the most tragic shipwreck in the history of the United States. The exact number of those who didn't survive is still unknown. According to various sources, this number was from 961 to 1,800 people. Don't be surprised that almost no one knows this story. There were many more survivors in the Titanic tragedy, and everybody heard about it. But the Sultana sank during one high-profile event. 12 days before the shipwreck, the country lost Abraham Lincoln. People hadn't yet recovered from this news, so no one paid much attention to the tragedy of the Sultana. Many catastrophes happened quite recently by historical standards. One of them occurred in 2002. The ferry La Jula was a Senegalese vessel. The ferry sailed twice a week, mainly along the coast of Dakar, carrying passengers who traded mango and palm oil. It made daily voyages and never faced severe problems thanks to modern rescue equipment and good repair service. But one day, the ship's crew discovered a malfunction and sent the boat to port. For almost a year, La Jula was in a non-working condition, awaiting repairs. But it didn't get high-quality service. After poor maintenance, the ferry set off on its last voyage. On September 26, 2002, La Jula sailed between southern Senegal and Dakar, and at 11 p.m. headed toward Gambia, where a strong storm began. The wind raised high waves, but this wasn't critical for the large passenger ship unless the number of people on board didn't exceed the established norm. La Jula was supposed to carry about 500 passengers, but had many more people that day. Too many passengers, poor repairs, and a strong storm caused severe problems for the ship. But the main factor in the shipwreck was that La Jula was only built for sailing in coastal waters, but that day, it sailed far from the shore. Big waves started rocking the boat, and at some point, it just turned upside down. The ship's deck went underwater, and its lower part stuck above the surface like an iceberg. All the passengers sitting in cabins fell on the ceiling and lost their orientation in space. There were no holes or damage in the ship's hull, and water flooded the lower decks for a long time. The vessel stood in a twisted position for several hours. Then, the boat began to sink when the water seeped through the deck and hold. The ocean was warm, but no one came to save the passengers. People had to wait almost 4 days to be rescued. Unfortunately, only a few managed to survive. The Philippines is a very dangerous area for ships. This place consists of several thousand islands and a vast area with shallow water. Ships can run aground and damage the hull with reefs and pitfalls. On September 20th, 1987, one of the most terrible disasters in navigation history occurred there. A Philippine passenger ferry called Dona Paz left one of the islands and sailed toward Manila. The sun was shining, the ocean was calm, and the visibility was good. But for some reason, the crew members didn't notice how the tanker Vector was approaching them. The two ships collided at low speed. The collision wasn't strong, but the problem was that the Vector had tons of oil on board, and the Dona Paz crashed into the cargo hold where that oil was stored. So it spilled all over the ocean, and then a spark slipped through. Not only did the two ships catch fire, but also filled with water. Both ships sank in a matter of seconds. Only a few dozen people survived that disaster. On September 27, 1854, the passenger ship Arctic sailed from Liverpool to New York. The fog came rolling down, and visibility got really bad. Another boat appeared out of the thick white haze, the French steamer Vesta. The ships were close enough to each other that a collision was inevitable. The French vessel was smaller, so it seemed to the Arctic's captain that Vesta had received a lot of damage. And while he was staring at the other ship, his boat got quickly filled with water. The captain gave the order to sail to the shore as fast as possible, but the ship's engines stopped working because of the flood. Then the ship's crew started to lower lifeboats with women and kids. Still, when rescuers found lifeboats with people, it turned out that only 87 out of 400 people survived, 65 crew members and 22 passengers. Surprisingly, there were only grown men among them. The ship's captain survived by clinging to the wreckage. All newspapers wrote about this story as one of the most terrible and shameful tragedies in navigation history. The survivors were criticized because they didn't save women and kids, and the crew members were accused of violating the law, since the safety of passengers should be higher than the safety of sailors. But despite this, none of them were brought to responsibility. Unfortunately, shipwrecks still occur to this day, but fortunately, there are fewer of them than before, thanks to modern navigation systems and radar. But no technology can guarantee there won't be a super strong storm or any other emergency that no one can foresee.
Not a lot of people have heard of this mysterious body of water named after famous English explorer Sir Francis Drake. Even though Drake himself never sailed through these waters, one of his ships did pass near this location and discovered a connection between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. That's how the area got named the Drake Passage in 1578. Soon enough, the passage became known for some mysterious disappearances. It got the reputation of being the roughest and most unpredictable stretch of water in the world. It's now known for its strong winds and rough seas, with waves that can reach up to 60 feet in height. The passage also has powerful currents with speeds never seen before. Does it sound like a good start to an adventure book? Sure, it doesn't make the place any less real. If you ever decide to travel between the southern tip of South America and the southern tip of the Antarctic Peninsula, you will come across the infamous Drake Passage. We call this place the Drake Passage today, but locals still believe it should be named after Spanish explorer Francisco de Oces. He was a Spanish navigator who, in 1525, led the first known European expedition to navigate the Drake Passage. The trip was part of an attempt of Spain to find a new route to the Spice Islands in the East Indies. Oces and his two ships, the San Lesmes and the Santiago, sailed through the Strait of Magellan and into the Drake Passage, where they encountered treacherous weather and rough seas. Despite the difficulties, they successfully navigated the passage and became the first Europeans known to have done so. However, the expedition failed to find a new trade route, and the crew returned to Spain with no significant discoveries. Some years later, in 1616, another ship captained by Dutch navigator Willem Schouten made one of the most successful voyages through the Drake Passage. Despite the difficulties of navigating the often turbulent seas, eventually, the Drake Passage became an important part of international trade routes in the 19th and early 20th centuries. But this dangerous area holds many secrets. The record of one of the most famous events that happened here takes us back to the year 1914. During that time, a British explorer named Shackleton wanted to travel to Antarctica with 27 men split between two ships. Those were named the Endurance and the Aurora. The explorers wanted to check out two routes that reached the continent. But in 1915, the Endurance got stuck in ice while crossing the Drake Passage and was slowly crushed. Shackleton and his crew had to leave the ship and could only gather some personal belongings. The Endurance eventually sank, and the crew had to survive on ice for a while. The mission changed from exploring to surviving, and only in 1916 all the men were rescued. The Aurora suffered a similar fate. It also got stuck in ice, and 3 men were lost at sea before the rest of the crew was rescued in 1917. For many years, the ship Endurance was thought to have been lost forever. But in 2022, a group of specialists went on a trip to find it. They left from Cape Town, South Africa on February 5th. The leader of the group said it was most likely the most difficult shipwreck search in history. They used special equipment to find the ship under the water and then used a special underwater camera to take a closer look. The members of the team were sure they had found the Endurance because it was in a place where very few ships had ever been. Despite being 10,000 feet underwater, the Endurance didn't look so shabby. It was actually pretty well preserved for a ship that had been underwater for more than 100 years. The explorers were still even able to see the word Endurance written on it. But it's not just ships that have a hard time with the Drake Passage. A plane with 38 people on board seemed to have disappeared over the Drake Passage in 2019, according to the Chilean authorities. It's believed it hit the icy and rough waters of the passage. Rescuers used ships, planes, and satellites to search for the missing plane and its passengers in the area where it had last sent messages. But the harsh conditions of the Drake Passage made the search very difficult. The exact location where the accident had happened was eventually found, but there were no survivors. The Viking Polaris is another of those ships that got damaged in the passage, even though it was designed for tough conditions. It was faster than most ships and more stable because of special equipment that kept it balanced. One night, back in 2022, the waves were indeed big, but the ship seemed to be doing well in the rough weather. But then, on its way back to port in Ushuaia, Argentina, a rogue wave suddenly hit the ship without warning. People on board felt like they had been hit by an iceberg. Rogue waves are much taller than other waves around them, and they're very unpredictable. Scientists still don't know exactly why they occur. When this rogue wave hit the Viking Polaris ship, it immediately broke windows on the second deck. Some people on board were hurt, but thankfully, most of them had been properly trained before boarding the ship and knew what they had to do in case of an emergency. The crew was also very good at helping the passengers. Most of them even claimed later that they would board the ship for the second time, despite such an unexpected experience. The boat eventually made it to the port without suffering further damage. What makes this region so hard to cross, though? For starters, the Drake Passage is a wide and deep area of water. It's about 500 miles wide and has a depth of 15,000 feet. Even the most experienced sailors who cross the passage every year say it can be dangerous, unpredictable, and even scary at times. And that's even considering the modern technologies we have today. The area is a mix of warm and cold temperatures, which can result in ravishing storms. Strong winds from the west push the water from the Pacific Ocean into the passage, creating waves and swells that can reach up to 30 feet or more. If accidents happen here, things can get ugly faster than anywhere else. The Drake Passage is a part of the ocean where the water is very cold and has strong currents. The bottom of the ocean there is also not stable, making it harder to find things like a plane or a ship. These days, we have modern technology that helps us feel safe, even when we're passing through rough seas. However, if you are planning to travel by boat to Antarctica, make sure you're ready for the rough sea in the Drake Passage, and for feeling a little uneasy. This can happen even to the most experienced of people when the waters are rough, but it's especially tough if it's your first time. Some people bring remedies to avoid feeling sick, like ginger gum or scented wristbands. Others find it helpful to look at the horizon. Test things out to see what works for you. Once you arrive at the Drake Passage, you'll be surprised to see that lots of different animals live there. You can see many types of dolphins, birds, whales, and penguins. The water in the Drake Passage is also good for small animals like plankton, krill, which bigger animals such as whales, penguins, and seals generally have on their daily menus. As you get closer to Antarctica, watch out for the South Shetland Islands. These might be the first pieces of land you'll see. They're also located in the Antarctic Peninsula and were first discovered in 1819 by British explorer William Smith. The South Shetland Islands are home to severe active volcanoes, including Deception Island and Mount Fenton. The islands are also where you can find a number of endemic species, including the South Shetland Islands Gentoo penguin, which is only found on this piece of land. They say nothing is ever lost, and it's true. Let's discover ships frozen in time. The first one is truly fascinating. Here, the Antikythera shipwreck. It's a Greek trading ship from the 1st century BCE. It's located on the east side of the Greek island of Antikythera and at the merging point of the Aegean and Mediterranean seas. Around 2,000 years later, in 1900, a group of Greek sponge divers discovered the wreck. They were going to Tunisia, yet they were forced to find shelter from a storm on a nearby island. Since they couldn't go anywhere due to the storm, they decided to look for sponges until the weather got calmer. One of the divers discovered the shipwreck at depths of around 130 feet. Imagine someone going for a sponge hunt, but getting out to the surface with archaeological treasures. The captain of the sponge boat talked to the Greek officials about what they had found. The officials sent 2 ships to the wreckage. The salvage operation was successful, and discoveries are now in Greece's National Archaeological Museum in Athens. The findings included 3 life-sized marble horses, jewelry, coins, and hundreds of works of art, including a 7-foot-tall colossus statue of Hercules. Among these treasures, Antikythera ephebe, a bronze statue of a young man, caught more attention. Because the ephebe doesn't comply with any familiar iconographic model, and there are no known copies of his type, he held a spherical object in his hand. Scholars have different theories of who that person could be, but they are not in a consensus yet. More than 70 years later, Jacques-Yves Cousteau and his team went to the area and recovered hundreds more artifacts and the remains of 4 people. Interestingly, they discovered a complex set of interlocking gears, capable of predicting the movement of the sun, moon, and several planets. The mechanism can also show the times of solar and lunar eclipses years into the future. Think of this Antikythera mechanism as an early computer calendar. To plan significant events like agricultural activities, religious rituals, and Olympic Games. These artifacts found in the Antikythera wreckage are some of the most important findings in modern archaeology. Just the Antikythera mechanism itself has changed our perception of the limits of ancient technology. The mechanism has a sophisticated design and was made over 1,000 years ago. After all these amazing discoveries, experts believe that the wreckage site has remained largely unexplored, and is mostly because of its location and the landscape of the seafloor on which the ship rests. The wreck is too deep for scuba divers but too shallow to use something like a submersible. A survey made on the seafloor in 2012 showed evidence of a second wreck about 800 feet to the south. It's clear that this area has a lot to offer humanity. What would happen if those sponge hunters didn't go to the area? Scientists found a shipwreck in Antarctica at the bottom of the Weddell Sea 107 years after it sank. The name of the ship was Endurance, and it was the lost vessel of Antarctic explorer Sir Ernest Shackleton. Scientists who laid eyes on it decades later say it is among the greatest undiscovered shipwrecks ever. That is why they filmed the whole discovery. The video shows the remains of the Endurance and proves it is still in remarkable condition. It has been sitting in 10,000 feet of water for over a century, yet it looks like it sank very recently. So the story goes like this. The ship was crushed by ice and sank in 1915. Shackleton and his crewmates had to escape by themselves in small lifeboats. From then on, it was all about survival. Shackleton imagined to get his crew to safety. Then, the ship sank. Yes, this is a pretty impressive story. But why did scientists prize this ship? Firstly, Shackleton's Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition sailed to make the first land crossing of Antarctica. Yes, the crew was trapped in ice, but the intention was important. Secondly, it's about the challenge itself of finding the shipwreck. The Weddell Sea is almost always covered in thick sea ice. The same ice that made the Endurance sink. Getting near the presumed sinking location is super hard, let alone being able to conduct research. Experts of the modern expedition team foresaw the time when the lowest extent of Antarctic sea ice would come using satellite images. They realized that the weather was in their favor to start an expedition. Dr. John Shears said that they have successfully completed the world's most difficult shipwreck search, fighting against constantly shifting sea ice, blizzards, and temperatures decreasing to negative 0.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeesh, I can't imagine the worst conditions in Antarctica if these conditions are in their favor. Lastly, look at this. It's timbers. They're very much intact. Plus, you can read the ship's name. It's still visible. Marine archaeologist Menson Bound says that this is the finest wooden shipwreck he has ever discovered. He has 50 years of career experience, so I believe the guy. So how come the wood is not rotten? Dr. Michelle Taylor, a deep-sea polar biologist, said that there has been little wood deterioration because the wood-munching animals are not in this forest-free region of Antarctica. Workers of a coal mine in East Serbia discovered 3 shipwrecks that had been there for at least 1,300 years. The largest shipwreck is an ancient Roman fleet. It's around 50 feet long with a flat bottom. It's estimated that the ship could carry a crew of 30 to 35 people. Looking at its hull, you can see the marks of repairs. Wow, this one had a lengthy career. You know, it gives us insight into more than 1,000 years ago. The 2 smaller vessels, on the other hand, match descriptions of boats used by Slavic groups to attack the Roman frontier. These 2 have been discovered under mud and clay in an ancient riverbed. Apparently, in those times, there was a Roman base in a place called Viminacium City. Interestingly, Viminacium was a provincial capital with an estimated 40,000 inhabitants in the 4th century CE. For comparison, it was even larger than Pompeii. The Kostelach coal mine is a center of hidden gems. Archaeologists had found evidence of ancient human and animal activity here before. For instance, in 2012, experts found bones of at least 5 woolly mammoths, which went extinct about 10,000 years ago. Canadian archaeologists found a ship 150 years after it went missing in the Canadian Arctic waters. This merchant ship is called HMS Investigator. It was purchased in 1848 to search for the explorer Sir John Franklin's ship that got lost in the Northwest Passage expedition. So, HMS Investigator left Britain in 1850 for this rescue operation. The expedition crew, captained by Robert McClure, sailed the Investigator into the water. He realized that he was in the final leg of the Northwest Passage, the sea route across North America. But before he could sail into the Beaufort Sea, the 122-ton ship itself got stuck in the thick ice. The crew spent the winter over the Prince of Wales Strait. The following summer, McClure tried again to sail to the end of the passage, but the ice blocked his way once more. Here, too, the crew was forced to leave the ship. He steered the crew into the Bay of Mercy. There, they were to remain until 1853 when the crew of the HMS Resolute rescued them. Imagine a crew of 60 people who had to spend 3 winters in the Arctic without even knowing if they would survive. Later on, the ship was found sitting upright in about 36 feet of water. It was in very good condition. Arctic water has prevented the outer deck of the vessel from deteriorating quickly. The outline of the ship and its timber can be clearly seen. Plus, archaeologists have uncovered artifacts on land left by the sailors. They had unloaded everything before abandoning the Investigator. 3 sailor graves and 1 British naval shipwreck had also been discovered in the area. I wonder what else they could find there. At the beginning of the 20th century, somewhere off the coast of West Africa, a German steamship was leaving the port. Suddenly, the weather got worse, and the vessel entered a thick fog. The sailors ran aground on a sandbank close to the shore. Luckily, no one was hurt, and they were even able to save their precious cargo. But the ship was stuck in the sand for good. And it was not alone there. Nearly the entire length of the western coast of Namibia is called Skeleton Coast. If the name sounds scary, that's because it is. This 976-mile-long beach line is among the most dangerous places on Earth. The local Bushman tribes believe that their supreme deity made this land when it was angry. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to set foot in Namibia in the 15th century. And yep, they didn't like Skeleton Coast either. Portuguese explorers thought this land presented the gates to the underworld. This is the place where the Namib Desert meets the Atlantic Ocean. It might be dangerous, but it's actually beautiful. Plus, It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. If Skeleton Coast had a PR manager, they would quit on the first day on the job. The area is not exactly tourist-friendly because of its geography and history. Beneath the sand and the waves, there is a secret ocean currently lurking for unsuspecting sailors. It's called Benguela Current. It flows towards the north along the coast of southern Africa. This part of the Atlantic is rich in marine life, but the current's land neighbor isn't that happy with the deal. This arid climate created the Namib Desert, one of the driest regions on Earth. And that marine life I just mentioned? It's sharks. 11 species of them to be exact. And yes, the great white decides to pop by once in a while. So far, we've got a desert landscape, strong currents, and sharks. Not a place for a beachside resort, definitely. But if someone ends up on Skeleton Coast, will they know they're in danger? Don't worry, they will. The beach is littered with wrecks of all sizes and shapes. If you remember that German ship I mentioned in the very beginning, its massive and rusted stern is now sticking out from the desert sand. There are some 500 wrecks in total scattered along the coast, and it's a mixed crowd, from Portuguese galleons centuries old to ships that ran ashore here in the 21st century. A modern fishing ship called Zala India managed to slip from its tow rope in 2008 and ended up on Skeleton Coast. Okay, it didn't escape on its own, it had some help from the elements. But it's better to be a tourist attraction on a beach than to be broken up for scrap. That's where the trawler was originally going, poor thing. Skeleton Coast's most famous inhabitant, to call it such a place, is the wreck of the Dunedin Star. The British cargo liner ran aground here in 1942. The massive rescue operation that followed reveals why it's so dangerous for sailors to end up here. The rescuers managed to save all of the crew and passengers, but at a heavy price. An aircraft and a tugboat were lost in the process. It took the last of the rescuers a full 2 months to return home to Cape Town. Why, you might wonder? One look at the map of the region reveals the reason. It's an endless sea of yellow, which is the sand. There are so few roads here, so Skeleton Coast is hard to reach by land. There are also legal obstacles. You need a special permit to drive into the area. But the skeletons in the name of the area don't only refer to ships, they also stand for animal bones. Most of these belong to whales and seals. Many animals have adapted to the area, so lions and hyenas roam the coastline in search of a meal. Yeah, now there are hungry lions as well, as if those sharks weren't enough. Other animals with a temporary residence on Skeleton Coast include elephants, cheetahs, leopards, and giraffes. In 1971, the Namibian authorities established a national park here, but except for surfers, after an adrenaline rush, they don't get many visitors. You can understand why. The Namib Desert is the oldest desert in the world, and it's not very tourist-friendly either. Those who travel to the region should pack sunscreen and a warm winter jacket. A weird combo, right? Well, not so much when you think that during the day, temperatures soar over 110 degrees Fahrenheit. At night, the air temperature drops below freezing. What a climate roller coaster! And that's not the final danger. Yep, there's more. Remember how that German ship got lost in thick fog? Yeah, it wasn't a one-off event. Because of the region's climate, fog shows up frequently. Sailors should cover their ears now, but this fog is actually good for wildlife. This is their only source of water in the Namib Desert. Reptiles and mammals have adapted to the harsh climate. They use as little water as possible. Shifting sands, thick fog, strong currents, lions, and sharks. Not the stuff you would put in a tourist booklet, but Skeleton Coast isn't the only beach on Earth you wouldn't want to spend your vacation on. I will take you to Cape Tribulation in Australia. The area covers some 48 square miles in the northwestern part of the continent. And no, the area is not as dry as Skeleton Coast. It's part of the Daintree rainforest. You could say that here, it is the rainforest, not the desert that meets the ocean. The beach at Cape Tribulation is straight from a postcard. But looks can be deceiving. Australia? Probably sharks. No, crocodiles are out here to get you if you decide to go for a dip in the sea. there are saltwater crocodiles that the locals call salties. Well, that's a cute nickname for such a dangerous reptile. And it's not just them. The wildlife seems to have a beef with visitors. From October to June, the waters around Cape Tribulation are full of box jellyfish. Their venom affects the human cardiovascular system. When touched by a jellyfish out at sea, swimmers won't have enough time to reach land for help. Vinegar helps neutralize the sting, so you might want to keep a spare bottle in your luggage. Crocodiles and jellyfish sound dangerous, but there's one more animal you should look after. It's the wild boar. It might sound funny, but you won't laugh when you're being chased by one of these across the beach. 21 million wild boars live in Australia. They're mostly active at night, making it even more dangerous if they charge at you. The best defense is running in circles. Wild boars can't cut corners well. That's probably why we don't see many of them taking up careers as race drivers. Cape Tribulation has one last danger installed for you, and it's not an animal. Out here, even the trees are plotting against visitors. The stinging tree got its name for a reason. If you try to pick one of its beautiful red berries, it'll fight back. Its prickles are like tiny glass shards. The less than pleasant effect on your skin will last for a month. Then there is this wait-a-while bush. Who keeps naming them like this? This long vine has spikes that grab hold and just don't let go. They are so strong they can pull a human off a horse. You'll have to wait for someone to come by and save you from this thorny grabber. If you are about to cross this Australian beach from the vacation list, hold on for a second. Tourism is booming here. The local authorities have restricted access to all of the danger zones. Visitors go swimming in dreamy water holes that are surrounded by lush vegetation. There are even ropes to swing from. Now, that's a beach you can finally relax on.
There's a ship drifting somewhere in the ocean without a crew. The last time someone saw it was over 50 years ago. Its story reminds of that of the Flying Dutchman, a ship that's bound to sail forever and bring disaster to whoever sees it at sea. At least the legend says so. Unlike the Flying Dutchman, the SS Baychimo was definitely real and built for a German company in Hamburg and began as an ordinary cargo ship. It was trading supplies between Hamburg and Sweden in the Baltic Sea starting from 1914. It had a strong steam engine and a hull made of steel. A few years later, it became British property. Then, in the 1920s, a Canadian company purchased it for around $18,000, a huge amount of money back then. The new owner, the Hudson's Bay Company, was actively using the ship for several years. They would often send it on voyages from its home port in Scotland to Siberia, Alaska, the Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. It also passed through the Panama Canal and even the Suez Canal, with fur pelts for sale on board. Sometimes it would also transport passengers. It had completed 9 successful voyages before this strip of good luck came to an end. Starting from the 1930s, SS Baychimo would have trouble with ice and storms. When it first got trapped in ice in October of 1931, some of the crew managed to escape to Alaska. 15 of 22 sailors decided to stay with their vessel and try to save it. They had furs and other valuable cargo worth around $58,000 aboard. The company sent them supplies to survive the winter. They set camp near the ship out of the hatches, tarpaulins, and other materials, and offloaded the cargo. At the end of November, a blizzard rushed through the area, and it seemed like it had taken the ship with it. The ice platform had survived, but the ship broke free. Some of the crew members were sure it had sunk. But soon after, they heard from one of the locals who had spotted their ship around 45 miles away from their camp. The crew moved on with their lives, and the ship started its journey as a runaway vessel. People would spot SS Baychimo once a year or so, all the way until 1965. It was mostly spotted off the coast of Alaska. A man going to Nome with his sled dog, along with prospectors, explorers, and treasure hunters, all claimed to have seen SS Baychimo. Someone tried to board it and take it to port, but ended up stranded on it for days because of horrible weather. Others got luckier and managed to take a whaleboat, some furniture, and other valuables from the vessel. Those who got close to the ship saw that it was damaged and missing the propeller. Still, it stayed afloat without a crew for at least 38 years and became the longest sailing ghost ship in history. In 2006, the Alaskan authorities started a project to solve the mystery of this ghost ship of the Arctic and finally find SS Baychimo, either still above or below the water. So far, the project has not been a success. SS Baychimo remains one of the estimated 4,000 ships that have disappeared off Alaskan shores. If the legend of the 17th century isn't lying, this ghost ship could be sailing somewhere along the Flying Dutchman. It belonged to the Dutch East India Company. Its captain managed to do the impossible for that time and sailed from Holland to Indonesia in only 3 months. They said he was flying over the sea, and some evil tongues explained that he had made a deal with evil forces to achieve that. Once the ship was sailing back home, its captain and crew disappeared without a trace. There are many versions of what happened to it. One of the first ones said it had tried to enter port at the Cape of Good Hope, got in a terrible storm, and sank as there was no captain to save it. Another legend says the captain had refused to obey the skies to let the ship sink during the storm. A scary life form then struck the boat and the crew, and it was condemned to forever wander without rest. Many sailors claim to have spotted the wandering Dutchman. The Duke of York, who was to become King of England, mentioned having seen it in Australian waters. Right after spotting the ship, the man who saw it first fell from the top of the mast and didn't survive. There were more encounters with this legendary ship up to the middle of the 20th century. Ships would nearly collide with it as the Flying Dutchman jumped out of the blue. Scientists have a more logical explanation for this mystery: Fata Morgana, not to be confused with Hakuna Matata. Now, when you're out at sea on a hot day and the air is all wavy, it feels like when you look at the road on a scorching summer day. That's because of something called atmospheric refraction. When light passes through different layers of air with different temperatures and densities, it bends and twists. Sometimes, under certain conditions, this bending of light can create really bizarre optical illusions over the ocean, like sightings of the Flying Dutchman. The Fata Morgana phenomenon can make distant objects appear distorted, stretched, or even lifted above the horizon. So you can see a ship far away, but because of the way the light is bending, it will look like it's floating above the water or even disappearing and reappearing. A Fata Morgana is most commonly seen in polar regions, especially over large sheets of ice that have a uniform low temperature. But you can see it anywhere, even in deserts and over lakes on hot days. The first stories about ghost ships go all the way back to ancient Greek and Roman mythology. One of the most famous ghost ships in history is the Mary Celeste. This brigantine was traveling from New York City to Genoa and was fully stocked with provisions, but missing a crew when it was discovered in the Atlantic Ocean in 1872. The crew's personal belongings were also there, completely undisturbed. The final entry in her log was made 10 days earlier. We still don't know what happened to its crew, and the ship has inspired many spooky stories and legends. The Lady Lovibond was another legendary schooner that is believed to have been wrecked off the coast of Kent in the middle of the 18th century. The story tells that the ship's captain, Simon Reed, had just got married and took his bride on board for a celebratory cruise, despite the superstition that it could bring bad luck. They were on their way to Portugal when the first mate, who is also in love with the captain's new wife, went mad because of jealousy, attacked another crew member, and then took over the wheel and steered the ship straight into the dreaded Goodwin Sands. No one aboard survived, and the schooner is said to reappear as a ghost vessel every 50 years. In present times, many vessels become abandoned and turned into ghost ships intentionally. There are thousands of them floating in U.S. rivers, lakes, channels, and coastal waters. Some people lose their boats in storms and other extreme weather. Others have to abandon their boats because maintaining them can cost 10% of the boat's price. Plus, docking a vessel can add up to several $1,000s every year. Most boats have been made of fiberglass, so an owner can't just recycle them as scrap metal. So, once they want to get rid of it, they often tie it to a dock and sneak away, or leave it floating far away from the shore, or just try to sink it. When ghost ships sink in shallow waters, they can cause damage to coral reefs, mangroves, marshlands, oyster habitats, and wetlands. Plus, they can collide with unsuspecting regular ships and cause real trouble. So, don't do that. Enough said.
Why has only the Bermuda Triangle become famous? You know, there are other mysterious triangles where ships disappear for strange reasons too. The triangle we're going to visit may seem to you much more dangerous and scarier than the Bermuda one. People tell stories about extraterrestrial ships, portals to another dimension, or Atlantis in the Bermuda region, and you've probably heard all this stuff. But the triangle I'm talking about has other legends. Imagine that you're sailing on your boat and notice a round ship in the middle of the endless ocean. A mysterious woman is standing on the deck of this strange ship, staring at you. Yeah, such stories go around the Dragon Triangle. And if you try to figure out something about this place, you'll find that even the triangle's location is a mystery. This place is located near the Japanese coast in the Pacific Ocean. The triangle extends from Japan to the Bonin Islands and touches the Philippine Sea, but this is not its exact geolocation. Some records say the triangle is 70 miles east of the Japanese coast, while others say it's about 750 miles away. This difference in coordinates is because the region where the triangle is located is not marked on any maps. The exact dimensions of these waters are still unknown. The Dragon's Triangle is also called the Pacific Bermuda Triangle. It's like an evil twin brother of the latter, but it's older. The fact is that reports of strange disappearances of ships in this region appeared much earlier than reports about the Bermuda Triangle. For the first time, people found out about the mysterious power of this place back in the 13th century. The grandson of Genghis Khan sent 40,000 people on ships toward Japan to conquer the country. Their route passed through the Dragon's Triangle. However, these people didn't reach the shore because of typhoons in this zone, so all the ships sank. After this incident, Genghis Khan's grandson changed his mind about attacking the country. Immediately after that, people in Japan began to believe that this place had magical powers. In the modern world, divers and archaeologists have tried to decide whether this story is true. They've explored the bottom of the triangle and found artifacts from the sunken Mongolian fleet. A few centuries later, in the early 1800s, another story happened there. Sailors who traveled through the Dragon's Triangle saw a strange ship that looked similar to Japanese equipment for burning incense. There was only one person on board. It was a mysterious woman. However, no one could find out who she was. In the 1940s and 50s, reports about ships disappearing in the region of the Triangle began to arrive. Fishing boats and large ships went missing. Japan sent a research ship there to find out the cause of the disappearances. But that vessel, with 31 crew members, was also gone. The wreckage of the research vessel was discovered later, but no one found the crew members. People began to recall the legends about this place. According to one of the myths, dragons live under the surface of the ocean. They destroy ships and take people to satisfy their hunger. Such stories are thousands of years old. But over time, in addition to fairy tales, scientific hypotheses began to appear. Scientists have tried to find out what's so peculiar about this place. One suggested that cold and hot currents mix and then pass through areas that attract strong electromagnetic waves. And when these mixed hot and cold currents meet these waves, they form electromagnetic interference. Electronic equipment on ships begin to break down, and navigation devices fail. At this moment, a storm starts, and vessels become helpless. They can't send distress signals or determine their location. Another theory says that underwater volcanoes are at the bottom of the triangle. They spew hundreds of thousands of tons of magma, churn the waters, and create giant waves. Seismic activity often happens off the coast of Japan, so this theory is quite logical. Also, volcanic activity can explain ancient legends about underwater dragons. Besides, islands often appear and disappear in this region. When magma cools down underwater and creates layers, they move upward and form land. Then, during the next eruption, they collapse and go underwater, but some of them remain. So imagine some ship sailing, and then a huge island rises from underneath and cracks its hull. Perhaps methane hydrates destroy ships. These substances come out of the Earth's crust, form large bubbles in the water, then rise and explode. Such a giant bubble can damage a ship's hull or even destroy a vessel. Anyway, scientists don't know for sure the reason for the disappearance of boats yet. And in general, all those mysterious cases that have occurred in that place are most likely nothing more than legends. The Dragon and Bermuda Triangles are in the oceans, but how about a triangle in a lake? It's located between Michigan and Wisconsin, right inside Lake Michigan. In 1950, a plane with 108 passengers on board disappeared without a trace while flying over the lake. When the search began, rescuers found a few pieces of the aircraft on the water. Besides the plane, many ships have gone missing there. Sometimes people disappeared into thin air, right from boats. One such case happened in 1937. The ship was sailing through the Lake Michigan Triangle when Captain George Donner went to rest in his cabin. 3 hours later, one of the crew members knocked on the door to wake the captain, but no one answered. When it became clear that something was wrong, the sailor walked inside, but saw no one there. The captain seemed to have vanished. The crew couldn't find him. Until now, the disappearance of Captain George Donner remains an unexplained mystery. It may be all fiction, but the Lake Michigan Triangle is creepy. And how about a triangle that's on the ground? This is the Bennington Triangle. It's located in the southwestern part of Vermont, USA. This is a place you really should avoid. There are many scary stories around it. It's up to you to decide whether they're true or not. In November 1945, a group of hunters passed through this area. A 74-year-old man was walking ahead of the group, and right in front of several people's eyes, he made a step and disappeared. No one could find him. The hunters called rescuers, but they didn't help. In December of 1946, several students went camping. An 18-year-old girl led a large group. She walked a few feet forward to figure out where to go next and disappeared. The tourists called the police. Officers began searching the area, and the FBI joined them. They got some information from locals living in nearby towns. They said that some girl similar to the description had been walking with a man much older than her. The two of them left by car and were never seen again. Soon, a similar vehicle was found not far from New York. The car was burned, so the police and experts couldn't confirm that the missing girl was inside. 3 years later, a man disappeared on the territory of the Triangle. He was waiting for a bus at the last stop. When the bus arrived, he got inside, but didn't reach his destination. He didn't get off the bus and didn't appear anywhere else. The police couldn't find any trace of the missing man. But the most terrible case occurred in 1950. Near the Bennington Triangle, a woman was driving a truck with her young son. She stopped the car and left for a few minutes to drop by a store or gas station. But when she came back, there was no one in the car. The police were combing the area. In the search, they used sniffer dogs, which managed to get on the boy's trail. The dogs followed the path and stopped at one place in the forest. The trail ended there. And you know what that spot was? The place where that student girl disappeared in 1946. The year was 1854, and the SS Arctic, the fastest passenger liner of its time, set out to cross the Atlantic. As it sailed through the misty veil, it slowly disappeared into the unknown. The Collins Line, an American shipping company, was started in 1818 and only began seriously trading in the transatlantic by 1835. Its steamships crossed the Atlantic from Liverpool to New York within just 10 days. Doesn't sound like a great speed today, I know, but back then, the same thing took other ships several weeks. Light on the water with their wooden hulls, powering through with a strong steam engine, those steamships were the favorite choice for many high-profile people. What could go wrong with such an advanced ship, they thought. This reminds me of some other ship everyone believed to be unsinkable. But anyway, back to the Collins Line. It grew to be a serious contender on transatlantic routes, with only one other competitor, the Cunard's Line. It was a British company also aiming to be the main force through the Arctic Passage. In 1835, the company received a new ship that traveled to Liverpool and came back to New York with the largest cargo ever at that time. From then, the Collins Line was steadily growing. It seems like there would only be future successes for it. Unfortunately, their lavish ships became costly to run with the amount of coal used. Massive power along with weak wooden hulls meant they needed many repairs after each voyage. So, every trip ended up being expensive. But since the ships were safe and had a great reputation, people were willing to pay the price, and the company was definitely not in crisis. They had achieved something no one had managed to do before them. Like I told you, their ships crossed the Atlantic in a whopping 10 days, and Edward Collins, the owner, was very determined to maintain the pace. Their 5 ships easily outran the Cunard's Line of only 3. With this great praise, it provided more attention. Though the Cunard's ships were slower with their iron hulls, they believed there was still profit, regardless of how slowly they sailed. Among Collins' ships, the Arctic, the third of them to be launched, was the largest, reaching 284 feet long, with 2 side-lever steam engines, each with 1,000 horsepower. The paddle wheels made 16 revolutions a minute when at full speed. At the time of its launch, the press called it the most stupendous vessel ever constructed in the United States. But glamour and fame couldn't avoid what would come next. On the 27th of September, the Arctic was on its journey from Liverpool to New York, continuing a speed pace through the thick fog. It's possible that by that moment, after 4 years of record-breaking trips, the crew became overconfident with their sailing and the ship. Going only 50 miles from Newfoundland, they carelessly continued through the fog with no radio contact, sonar, or any other form of identifying objects, equipped only with Morse code. A smaller ship, the SS Vesta, which operated as a fishing vessel, often worked around Newfoundland. It was passing through the same path as the Arctic and crashed into its side. Shocked by the collision, the captain of the Arctic offered help to the much smaller Vesta, but it was soon clear that the damage that seemed minor on the Arctic was far worse. Beneath the waterline, a hole was letting water into the hull. The cost of the much faster wooden hull now seemed less valuable. They steered toward land, trying to plug the holes, but they weren't doing so well, and the seawater continued to pour in, filling up higher and pushing the ship down. And finally, once the engine room was full, it put out the boilers, taking away the massive power the Arctic was once legendary for. They moved slowly until coming to a complete stop. The ship continued to sink, and the order was to abandon it. At the time, maritime law allowed for the Arctic to carry only 6 lifeboats, only capable of saving 180 people. The crew and some of the passengers managed to push their way aboard and took most of the seats on those boats. Things were pretty wild, and everyone forgot about their manners, not letting the ladies and the youngest ones board first. It took 4 hours for the Arctic to sink. 150 crew and 250 passengers were on board. Those that weren't able to find a lifeboat made a desperate attempt to build their own rafts from parts of the ship. 2 days later, only 3 boats made it safely to the shore. The other 3 were never found. Believe it or not, the rescue party also saved some people that had been clinging to the wreckage for 2 days. Unlike the crew, the captain went down with the Arctic, but amazingly survived. He would be only one of 85 people that made it out of the 400 on board. When the news arrived 2 weeks later, the public responded with great sadness to the losses. Great anger soon followed towards the poor safety measures in the crew. The press published demands to change the laws for more lifeboats. It only made sense to have enough for every person on board a ship. But they ignored those requests. This neglect would lead to more disasters in the future. Enough lifeboats would only come into maritime law some 60 years later, after the disaster of the Titanic. Edward Cullen's wife and 2 children were also aboard the ship and didn't return. He was heartbroken, but didn't stop running his business. The Collins Line still had a reputation to uphold, the biggest, fastest, and most luxurious on the Atlantic. Edward Collins would now build an even better ship than any other. It was named the Adriatic, and it was the largest ship in the world, 354 feet long. With 2 alternating steam engines that had never been built of this size. These steam engines at the time were at the height of engineering, though today you can only see them in models and toys. With the new addition of 2 masts, the Adriatic would also be able to sail if needed. Luckily, they made some lessons from the disaster of the Arctic. But before their new ship, the Adriatic, was built, another disaster had occurred. The sister ship of the Arctic had also sunk. They believe this second ship was desperate to stay in front of the Cunard's line and hit an iceberg somewhere during the race. This weird contest took the lives of 141 people. The desperation of Collins and his weakly built hulls pushed the company towards bankruptcy in 1858. The newly built Adriatic, costing over $1 million, had only made 1 voyage in the end. And even that voyage was considered a disaster. The ship collided with a tugboat. It still managed to finish its maiden voyage at a suitable time. After the company had gone bankrupt, they had to sell the ship for only $50,000. They removed the great giant engines, replacing them with only sails. Although it was once the greatest ship on the high seas, it was only 30 years later until it was abandoned, labeled irreparable, and anchored in a river. The other remaining ships were also sold and only used for parts. Edward Collins left the industry altogether, seeking work on dry land instead. As the Collins Line was no longer in the mix, the Cunards would grow in strength. Without competition, they would win the Blue Riband for the next 30 years, and 180 years later, after producing hundreds of ships. They still have a constant presence on the seas as they provide transatlantic crossings, world voyages, and leisure cruises. To this day, the Cunard Line is the only one to run ships between Europe and America, and it's great proof that it's not always the fastest that's the best.
A ship is traveling across the Atlantic Ocean when a storm starts. At first, the situation doesn't seem to be very bad, but soon, people on board the ship realize that the storm is intensifying. Waves are huge, and nothing can save the ship. It's starting to sink. On board, there's only 1 lifeboat. Sadly, it can only hold 1 person. The captain is in a terrible situation. He needs to decide which passenger can be given a chance to survive. Besides the captain, there are 8 people on board. Some of them seem to be lovely. Others look like villains. But you might not know the truth until it's too late. The first passenger is Alex, a 28-year-old talented artist. He's just had his first international exhibition and is boasting about that left and right. He claims to dream of inspiring the world with his art, but did I mention it's his shy twin brother who painted those masterpieces? And Alex just steals his shine? Next is 23-year-old Maria, who's 8 months pregnant. She's quite spoiled, often behaves unreasonably, and treats the staff on board badly. She's traveling home to her husband, but little does he know that the kid is not his, but his best friend's. And she's been cheating on him since forever. Though we can't let this innocent soul perish, can we? Despite his untidy appearance, this 65-year-old scientist, Professor Marcus, is a leading researcher in the field of gene therapy. He's working on a breakthrough that could save millions of lives, but there are skeletons in his closet too. It's been 15 years since anyone saw his wife, Judith. Does Marcus's scientific progress have something to do with the mysterious disappearance of his wife? Dr. Anna is 34 years old. She's a surgeon who's saved hundreds of lives during natural disasters. She succeeded as a doctor, but failed as a parent. Her 3 daughters live with their dad and don't want to hear anything about their mother. 78-year-old Teresa is a widow whose family gave up on her because of her bad temper. She's traveling for the last time in her life to visit her late husband's grave. A little boy, Mark, is just 7 years old, but his unruly character has caused a lot of arguments between the other passengers. He's traveling alone since his parents are supposed to meet him on the shore. This brat's parents are too busy working, so he gets more and more uncontrollable. Who knows what he'll be capable of doing in 10 years or so? A robot android, Alpha 3, is also on board the ship. It has an artificial intelligence created to assist in expeditions. It can also control the ship in emergency cases. And the last passenger is Emily. This beautiful and charming woman is 30 years old. She lives off of powerful, old, rich men and has enough money to burn. She hasn't worked a single day in her entire life and just travels the world. To make his choice, the captain invites each of the passengers to listen to their stories. He asks each of them just one question. Why would you be the one to survive? Alex says, "You see, my art can inspire and change the world. Looking at my works, they help people see the beauty of life, especially during difficult times. I must continue living. I have so much to show through my paintings." Maria answers, "Can't you see that a new life is growing inside my body? It's me and my unborn kid who must survive. We risk losing a talented doctor or an artist in the future. It's not just my life we're talking about." Professor Marcus says, "My work is not finished yet. It might save thousands of lives. I'm close to a breakthrough and I need to live to make it." Dr. Anna says, "My hands save lives. I have proven many times that I can do the impossible in extreme conditions. The world can't lose my skills and knowledge." The elderly woman begs,
"Please, you must understand me. I might have lived a long life, but I want to see my husband's grave."
Mark says,
"I'm still a kid. My parents are waiting for me at home. I want to hug my mom and dad."
Alpha 3 states that it was created to serve and help people. Its ability to analyze situations and make rational decisions in a crisis can be used to prevent future disasters. Emily admits,
"Look at me. Doesn't every person have their unique value? I'm young and beautiful, and I have a lot of potential. Surely you see it."
The captain is desperate. How can he, a mere mortal, decide who should live and who he should take this chance away from? After pacing his cabin and hitting the walls with his fists, he decides to estimate passengers' value and see how useful they are. Alex, as a talented artist, can influence society through his art, providing inspiration for thousands of people who will see his masterpieces. But no one knows where his ego can bring him. Plus, remember who the real artist is. Saving Maria means saving her unborn child. But however cynical it may sound, the contribution of these two lives to the future of society is assumed, but not guaranteed. What if that child grows up to become a criminal? Professor Marcus can indeed provide significant benefits to society through his scientific research, but he isn't young. What if he doesn't live long enough to finish his work? Dr. Anna is a surgeon. She's already saved a lot of lives and will definitely continue to do so in the future. Her ability to provide immediate medical assistance in critical situations makes her one of the most valuable candidates for survival, since she can directly and regularly save lives. At the same time, she is a terrible mother, and it'll definitely influence the lives of her daughters. Teresa is living history and experience, but unfortunately, her ability to continue contributing to society is limited. In simple words, she's old, and we don't know how much time she has left. Mark is in a similar situation. He has the potential for a long and productive life, but his immediate contribution to society is limited. His survival is based on the potential for future contribution, which is difficult to estimate at the moment. Alpha 3 can provide valuable technical assistance and functional support, but as a robot, it does not add to human well-being directly. As for Emily, despite her beauty, her achievements are minimal. On the other hand, she's only dating wealthy and influential people, and thus has a lot of influence on society of her own. Now, from the perspective of how much profit each of the passengers can bring, saving Dr. Anna seems to be one of the most logical choices. Her knowledge and skills can save many lives in the future, which means the greatest good for the greatest number. But let's have a look at the captain's choice. In the end, after listening to all the passengers and pressed for time, the man decides to save Emily. Can you figure out why he's made such an unexpected choice? Write your answer in the comments below. You can also pause the video to think it over. Okay, I suppose you're ready for the answer to be revealed. You see, even though each passenger presented very compelling arguments for why they should be saved, the captain was particularly moved by Emily's charm and attractiveness. And even though there were more logical candidates in terms of utilitarianism and humanism, the captain succumbed to his personal feelings and preferences, which influenced his decision. This riddle illustrates that in real life, people often make choices based on their sympathies and preferences rather than logic or public benefit. This is because emotions and personal relationships can have a strong influence on our perception of situations and decision-making. Here's a real-life example. HR managers tend to choose candidates they like or share common interests with, and it doesn't matter that other candidates might have more suitable skills or experience. This phenomenon is known as the similarity effect. Now, I've got an important question for you. Which passenger would you save? Share your choice in the comments. But I'd like to remind you that there is no correct answer.
The Bermuda Triangle is one of the most heavily traveled shipping routes in the world. Some skeptics believe that this fact solves the Bermuda Triangle mystery. Statistically, the busier the area, the higher the frequency of accidents and disappearances. While this makes sense, it's not the frequency of disappearances that's responsible for the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle. It's the lack of explanation or wreckage found. On his very first voyage to the New World in 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed through the Bermuda Triangle. Columbus reported that one night, when he was on the deck of the ship, he noticed a giant light appear in the distance, unlike anything he'd ever seen before. Columbus looked at his compass for direction, and it gave off erratic readings. You might have noticed that the Bermuda Triangle doesn't appear on any world map. This is because official institutions refuse to acknowledge that the area actually exists. No one exactly knows how many ships and planes have disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle. The rough estimate is 50 ships and 20 planes. Most of the time, the disappearances had no explanation and no wreckage has ever been left behind. When the TBF Avenger planes went missing, a massive search operation was conducted. Boats and planes searched the Bermuda Triangle for any signs of the aircraft. One of the boats searching was a PBM-5 Mariner airboat. The airboat took flight at 7:27 p.m. and called in a routine radio message 3 minutes later. Then, it was never heard from again. No trace was ever found of the rescue airboat. or the 5 Avenger aircraft. A huge investigation was launched into the disappearance of all these vehicles, but nothing was ever discovered. The Bermuda Triangle is home to some pretty intense and unexpected weather. Storms build up quickly and unexpectedly, then disappear soon after. If you blink, you might miss it. This could explain why few distress signals are issued. Pilots and sailors never saw the weather coming. A popular theory suggests that rogue waves are responsible for the many disappearances. Rogue waves are called extreme storm waves by scientists. They occur when different weather patterns take place at the same time and cause large unexpected waves that reach up to 100 feet tall. Witnesses say that the waves look like giant walls of water. These waves could explain why ships go down fast and without leaving any trace. Just off the coast of Japan, you'll find the Bermuda Triangle of the Pacific Ocean. They call it the Devil's Triangle. Between 1950 and 1954, 9 ships disappeared in this area without leaving a trace. The ship Kaio Maroon 5 was sent to investigate these unexplained disappearances when it also vanished. After this incident, the Japanese authorities labeled the area as a danger zone, and sailors were encouraged to avoid it. Some people blame all disasters on the extraterrestrial paranormal activity. Others suppose it's all about raging natural phenomena. Some scientists believe the cause of anomalies is the environmental changes. Also, there's a really high concentration of methane hydrates on the bottom of the ocean in the Pacific Bermuda area. This gas tends to set off, and when it happens, bubbles start forming on the surface of the water. These gas eruptions can interrupt the ability to float and can easily sink a ship. Because of this chemical reaction, there won't be even a trace left. Underwater volcanoes are said to be another possible explanation for the Japanese Dragon's Triangle. In fact, they can take down even small islands. Luckily, nobody lives there. It's a pretty common thing in this area that some of them disappear underwater and others appear out of the blue because of seismic activity. You'll never find the Dragon's Triangle on any official map of the world, so nobody's quite sure about how large it is in reality. In July 2015, 2 teenagers disappeared after setting sail off the coast of Florida. There's some mystery about what the 2 teens were really getting up to. They told their parents that they were just going to fish, but they told their friends that they were crossing to the Bahamas. Shortly after they left, a line of thunderstorms moved towards the area, and the boys were never heard from again. A massive search was conducted, but sadly, nothing was found. 1 year later, the pair's boat was found off the coast of Bermuda with a broken iPhone and some personal effects left inside. One of the most popular and bizarre theories trying to solve the Bermuda Triangle mystery comes from Charles Berlitz. He insists that the area is home to the lost city of Atlantis. The missing ships and planes and malfunctioning equipment, according to him, were all caused by rays of energy let out by the special energy crystals that power Atlantis. While this sounds silly, Berlitz's theory was convincing enough that over 20 million people bought his book worldwide. Previously, the compass wouldn't work well in the Bermuda Triangle since the lines of the 2 poles coincided here, true north and magnetic north. But if you fall into this line, your compass will behave strangely. But the magnetic north is constantly shifting, and now it's far beyond the triangle. No legend says pirates of the last centuries operate in the Bermuda Triangle, or that the Flying Dutchman makes other ships disappear. A popular theory is that ships travel to the distant past or future through a time portal in the Bermuda Triangle. Fortunately, these are all myths. Just imagine hundreds of giant tentacles reaching out to a group of ships sailing through the Bermuda Triangle. In the past centuries, they could easily sink an entire fleet, since the ships were made of wood and were lighter. Squids wrapped decks with their strong tentacles, made holes in the ship's hulls with their sharp beaks. Toothy suction cups could break the masts and tear the sails. The water was filling the holds and slowly rising to the deck. The ship sank in a matter of minutes. Survivors reached the shore and told everyone about huge monsters. This is how the legends of the Kraken appeared. Fortunately, now people have sonars and equipment for monitoring the sea space. They say the main reason why this place is so enigmatic must be the magnetic fields that form this ominous triangle. ocean floor is made of rocks containing a lot of magnetite. It's more like iron. Magnetic fields react to the high concentration of magnetite on the ocean floor, which may start a sort of conflict between the two. It can often lead to various weather anomalies and, as a result, navigation issues. And naturally, any changes in the ocean floor or the Earth's magnetic fields influence the Bermuda Triangle a lot. Magnetic fields tend to shift their position, so do tectonic plates and even the continents, even though we never notice it. The skies are usually very clear there, but back in 1883, some people witnessed abnormal things in the area. Some claim to have seen large blocks of ice falling from the skies, and the crew even managed to save one as hard proof. Seems like the Bermuda Triangle has an alternate not only on Earth, but even in space. Spacecraft usually don't disappear into thin air though, like there's no air. This anomalous area is really large and stretches right above the South Atlantic. It occupies the area from Chile to Zimbabwe and sits right at the point where Van Allen radiation belts are the closest to the surface of our planet. The Earth has two such belts, which come in handy trapping the particles that shoot in from the Sun. They do a great job protecting the Earth from radiation. The magnetic field there is lower, so it allows the Earth's radiation belt to come closer to the surface. Whenever a satellite passes by, it will be exposed to radiation, which might lead to serious damage. So, no satellite can take pictures of it. The South Atlantic anomaly is part of the Earth where natural radiation just flows out of control. Still, there is little evidence that all these triangles are really dangerous. Many believe the Bermuda Triangle itself has been proven time and again to be nothing but a work of fiction. In fact, some shipwrecks, such as the Ellen Austin, gained popularity in the middle of the 20th century, while nobody even thought of drawing a triangle in the Bermuda area before that. The mystery was popularized by science fiction writers and became a common myth, while no serious research proved it any more dangerous than other parts of the world's ocean. So, the crew of the Ellen Austin back in 1881 weren't even aware of the Bermuda Triangle back then, let alone afraid of it. What do you think?
Not a lot of people have heard of this mysterious body of water named after famous English explorer Sir Francis Drake. Even though Drake himself never sailed through these waters, one of his ships did pass near this location and discovered a connection between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. That's how the area got named the Drake Passage in 1578. Soon enough, the passage became known for some mysterious disappearances. It got the reputation of being the roughest and most unpredictable stretch of water in the world. It's now known for its strong winds and rough seas, with waves that can reach up to 60 feet in height. The passage also has powerful currents with speeds never seen before. Does it sound like a good start to an adventure book? Sure, it doesn't make the place any less real. If you ever decide to travel between the southern tip of South America and the southern tip of the Antarctic Peninsula, you will come across the infamous Drake Passage. We call this place the Drake Passage today, but locals still believe it should be named after Spanish explorer Francisco de Oces. He was a Spanish navigator who, in 1525, led the first known European expedition to navigate the Drake Passage. The trip was part of an attempt of Spain to find a new route to the Spice Islands in the East Indies. Oces and his two ships, the San Lesmes and the Santiago, sailed through the Strait of Magellan and into the Drake Passage, where they encountered treacherous weather and rough seas. Despite the difficulties, they successfully navigated the passage and became the first Europeans known to have done so. However, the expedition failed to find a new trade route, and the crew returned to Spain with no significant discoveries. Some years later, in 1616, another ship captained by Dutch navigator Willem Schouten made one of the most successful voyages through the Drake Passage. Despite the difficulties of navigating the often turbulent seas, eventually, the Drake Passage became an important part of international trade routes in the 19th and early 20th centuries. But this dangerous area holds many secrets. The record of one of the most famous events that happened here takes us back to the year 1914. During that time, a British explorer named Shackleton wanted to travel to Antarctica with 27 men split between two ships. Those were named the Endurance and the Aurora. The explorers wanted to check out two routes that reached the continent. But in 1915, the Endurance got stuck in ice while crossing the Drake Passage and was slowly crushed. Shackleton and his crew had to leave the ship and could only gather some personal belongings. The Endurance eventually sank, and the crew had to survive on ice for a while. The mission changed from exploring to surviving, and only in 1916 all the men were rescued. The Aurora suffered a similar fate. It also got stuck in ice, and 3 men were lost at sea before the rest of the crew was rescued in 1917. For many years, the ship Endurance was thought to have been lost forever. But in 2022, a group of specialists went on a trip to find it. They left from Cape Town, South Africa on February 5th. The leader of the group said it was most likely the most difficult shipwreck search in history. They used special equipment to find the ship under the water and then used a special underwater camera to take a closer look. The members of the team were sure they had found the Endurance because it was in a place where very few ships had ever been. Despite being 10,000 feet underwater, the Endurance didn't look so shabby. It was actually pretty well preserved for a ship that had been underwater for more than 100 years. The explorers were still even able to see the word Endurance written on it. But it's not just ships that have a hard time with the Drake Passage. A plane with 38 people on board seemed to have disappeared over the Drake Passage in 2019, according to the Chilean authorities. It's believed it hit the icy and rough waters of the passage. Rescuers used ships, planes, and satellites to search for the missing plane and its passengers in the area where it had last sent messages. But the harsh conditions of the Drake Passage made the search very difficult. The exact location where the accident had happened was eventually found, but there were no survivors. The Viking Polaris is another of those ships that got damaged in the passage, even though it was designed for tough conditions. It was faster than most ships and more stable because of special equipment that kept it balanced. One night, back in 2022, the waves were indeed big, but the ship seemed to be doing well in the rough weather. But then, on its way back to port in Ushuaia, Argentina, a rogue wave suddenly hit the ship without warning. People on board felt like they had been hit by an iceberg. Rogue waves are much taller than other waves around them, and they're very unpredictable. Scientists still don't know exactly why they occur. When this rogue wave hit the Viking Polaris ship, it immediately broke windows on the second deck. Some people on board were hurt, but thankfully, most of them had been properly trained before boarding the ship and knew what they had to do in case of an emergency. The crew was also very good at helping the passengers. Most of them even claimed later that they would board the ship for the second time, despite such an unexpected experience. The boat eventually made it to the port without suffering further damage. What makes this region so hard to cross, though? For starters, the Drake Passage is a wide and deep area of water. It's about 500 miles wide and has a depth of 15,000 feet. Even the most experienced sailors who cross the passage every year say it can be dangerous, unpredictable, and even scary at times. And that's even considering the modern technologies we have today. The area is a mix of warm and cold temperatures, which can result in ravishing storms. Strong winds from the west push the water from the Pacific Ocean into the passage, creating waves and swells that can reach up to 30 feet or more. If accidents happen here, things can get ugly faster than anywhere else. The Drake Passage is a part of the ocean where the water is very cold and has strong currents. The bottom of the ocean there is also not stable, making it harder to find things like a plane or a ship. These days, we have modern technology that helps us feel safe, even when we're passing through rough seas. However, if you are planning to travel by boat to Antarctica, make sure you're ready for the rough sea in the Drake Passage, and for feeling a little uneasy. This can happen even to the most experienced of people when the waters are rough, but it's especially tough if it's your first time. Some people bring remedies to avoid feeling sick, like ginger gum or scented wristbands. Others find it helpful to look at the horizon. Test things out to see what works for you. Once you arrive at the Drake Passage, you'll be surprised to see that lots of different animals live there. You can see many types of dolphins, birds, whales, and penguins. The water in the Drake Passage is also good for small animals like plankton, krill, which bigger animals such as whales, penguins, and seals generally have on their daily menus. As you get closer to Antarctica, watch out for the South Shetland Islands. These might be the first pieces of land you'll see. They're also located in the Antarctic Peninsula and were first discovered in 1819 by British explorer William Smith. The South Shetland Islands are home to severe active volcanoes, including Deception Island and Mount Fenton. The islands are also where you can find a number of endemic species, including the South Shetland Islands Gentoo penguin, which is only found on this piece of land.
Its ruins lie somewhere in the darkness of the ocean depths, covered in seaweed, damaged by the ravages of time. The city of Atlantis allegedly existed 12,000 years ago. Then it sank, and over centuries, people have been passing stories about it. Many think it was just a regular island, but so many legends tell about a powerful empire. Atlantis supposedly was one of the wealthiest and most fascinating cities of its time. Your breath would have been taken away if you had stepped through its central gate. Amazing decorations and towering marble statues were all over the place. The rumor has it, the entire city is under the water now. Some people believe that it's on the seabed somewhere in the Bermuda Triangle. Some even claim that an underwater pyramid in the Atlantic is somehow responsible for all those planes, people, and boats that mysteriously disappear there, and no one can track them later. The story says that in the late 1960s, there was a group of treasure hunters that came across the ruins of an ancient city. It happened during one of their diving expeditions in the Bermuda region off the coast of Miami. They spoke about the intriguing remains of the city and mentioned a glass pyramid they also stumbled upon there. They claimed it was bigger than any other pyramid, even those discovered in Egypt. Of course, those were just stories. But unusual things do happen in that area. For example, volatile water currents or a strong vortex that occurs from time to time. The Bermuda Triangle is one of the best spots for researchers to explore. They go there to study minerals, the seabed, and the Gulf Stream. They study how the ocean influences weather. The geological structure of the planet's crust deep down under the ocean floor is especially interesting. The deepest point in the Atlantic Ocean lies in the Bermuda Triangle. Researchers have done a lot of studies and drilling there to find out what lies a couple of miles beneath the seabed in that area. There's an awesome variety of seabed landforms in the Bermuda Triangle. You can hardly see anything like that anywhere else on Earth, especially if you keep in mind that this is a relatively small ocean region. Look at this shelf with shallow banks. There are also plateaus, plains, and deep-sea trenches. If you believe the Bermuda Triangle is some sort of a trap, you're not wrong, considering its complex geological structure. There are a couple of groups of seamounts in the eastern and northern regions of the triangle. They're mostly unnamed. Some of them are up to 650 feet high. At such heights, they would be considered regular hills on the surface. But by ocean standards, these so-called underwater hills are like small mountains. They're either elliptical or round. You can see that if you take a look from above. There are more seamounts in the Pacific than in the Atlantic Ocean. The underwater world in the Atlantic is less diverse than in the Pacific, unless we're talking about the Bermuda Triangle. The limestone platform that forms the bottom of the triangle is nearly 3.7 miles deep, and this entire thick layer consists of the remains of small ancient creatures. In 2019, a big group of geologists published an article where they claimed that the triangle formed as a result of strong volcanic activity. For years, people believed there were ancient, long-extinct volcanoes that brought the Bermuda Islands from the sea bottom. So, one theory says the Bermuda Islands formed because there were disruptions in magma flows. Pieces of ancient plates that were already in the mantle went up to the surface, and then they mixed. That's how many volcanic islands in the oceans could form. Knowing this, science fiction writers let their imagination run wild. They told stories about scary creatures and mystical cities, or islands, hidden deep down beneath all those layers. All these mysterious stories encourage people to create their own theories. In the 15th century, a well-known man named Christopher Columbus was on what would later become one of the greatest and most important expeditions ever. He was one of the first people to tell stories about a mysterious region that was later called the Bermuda Triangle. This area was first known as the Somers Isles, named after British naval hero and privateer George Somers. But Spanish explorer Juan de Bermudez discovered the island in 1505, and that's when the area got the name it has today. So, Columbus mentioned some pretty strange sightings within the area, starting with a light similar to that of a candle moving up and down in the distance. He immediately warned his crew and asked them to look at the light, which kept vanishing and reappearing. He spoke about stars that seemed to move around in the sky. The needle of their compass went crazy too. But the most unusual thing he claimed he had seen was an unknown glowing object coming out of the sea and shooting toward the sky. Many people these days believe there was nothing really unusual there. Those must have been lights coming from another ship or from the shore. But Bermuda intrigues us today too. It's a roughly triangular area where ships disappear without any trace. Sometimes they show up later, but empty and with not a single person on board. But more often, no one ever finds their wrecks. And it's not just ships. Planes go missing too. The training sailing ship HMS Atalanta was one of the first cases in the string of mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle. The ship left a dockyard in Bermuda and headed in the direction of England back in 1880. It never reached the British Isles. It actually never even left the Bermuda region. It just went missing, and no one ever found any trace of it. Some said the ship disappeared because of a powerful storm they came across on their route. The crew members probably didn't have enough experience to handle such a situation. Back then, everyone wanted to know what had happened to the ship. How could it just disappear like that? It made headlines. People were coming up with all kinds of possible theories about what could have happened. The story continued with the coal carrier Cyclops. In 1918, it sailed off the island of Barbados, and after a couple of days, the situation repeated. The ship disappeared without a trace, along with more than 300 people on board. 3 years later, in 1921, a Coast Guard on the Diamond Shoals near Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, discovered a massive commercial ship that ran aground. The Guard was prepared to help people in trouble, but they had no one to save. The ship was empty. None of the passengers or crew members were there. Some theories about this accident included pirates, but no one really found out what had happened. Flight 19 turned out to be one of the most famous incidents in that area. An entire group of aircraft disappeared in the area in 1945. A further rescue expedition didn't go well either, because one of the mariners with 13 crew members also went missing. And it's not that such things only happened a long time ago. A 29-foot-long ship with 20 people on board went missing a day after it was due to arrive at Lake Worth, Florida. There were neither any records of the ship nor any distress signal. The search mission involved boats and aircraft and lasted 84 hours. The rescue team covered an area that was nearly 2 times the size of the entire state of Massachusetts, but still nothing. The Bermuda Triangle is a place of great mystery, but the islands are a perfect spot for travelers. It's an excellent place if you're into golfing, for example. So, if you're lucky, you might easily run into some famous golf players or celebrities while there. And here's something interesting for music fans. John Lennon got inspiration for nearly 25 of his songs on one of these fascinating islands.
Can we estimate how many ships and airplanes were lost in the Bermuda Triangle? Have their disappearances resulted from human error or weather phenomena? Let's try to find out. We have a curious story of the SS Cotopaxi. This ship vanished in 1925, traveling from Charleston, South Carolina to Havana, Cuba. It never reached its destination. Years later, in the 1980s, a wreck was found 40 miles off St. Augustine, Florida. Since specialists could not precisely determine what and where it came from, they nicknamed it Bear Wreck. It took many additional years of work, done mainly by marine biologists, to identify that this ship was indeed the missing SS Cotopaxi. This was confirmed in January 2020. How did the ship just reappear? And how did it get there, since this mysterious shipwreck isn't even in the Bermuda Triangle? Now, let's see who came up with this term, Bermuda Triangle. Can you actually pinpoint the triangle on a map? No, it's not an officially recognized location either. The Bermuda Triangle does not appear on any world map. Nobody has agreed on its exact boundaries. There are only assumptions with approximations of the entire area, ranging between 500,000 and 1.5 million square miles. By all approximations, the region has a vaguely triangular shape. In 1964, an American author named Vincent Hayes Gaddis first came up with the idea when writing an article for Argosy magazine. He used the Bermuda Triangle to describe a triangular region that has destroyed hundreds of ships and planes without a trace. It is pretty hard to get the number of lost ships and planes because some ships and aircraft have gone missing without leaving a trace. Their wreckage in the region has not been recovered, but the recorded stories should help us. Legends about the Bermuda Triangle date back to the 15th century, like that of the Italian explorer Christopher Columbus. When sailing through the Atlantic waters, he passed by this location in the late 1400s. In what we now know as the Bermuda Triangle, he saw a huge flame that seemed to just crash into the ocean. Later, he saw an unusual light flashing in the distance at the exact location. Like many other sailors since then, his compass had severe malfunctions. Flight 19, a Navy plane on a routine schedule back in 1945, also started the Bermuda Triangle legend. It was commanded by Lieutenant Charles Taylor, and it's recorded that he just got lost in the triangle for no reason. Since pilots had no GPS back then, they had to trust their compasses and keep track of how long they'd been flying in a specific direction and their speed. Shortly after completing the task, both of the compasses on board stopped working correctly. Records found after the plane's disappearance also indicate that Taylor didn't have a watch on that particular day. The initial report stated that pilot error was to blame for this unfortunate event. However, because people weren't satisfied with this outcome, it was changed to causes or reasons unknown after several reviews. One surviving pilot named Bruce Guerin suggested he went through an electronic fog while passing above the triangle, making him travel through time. In 1970, when this incident happened, he was flying his aircraft when it was surrounded by two huge clouds that formed a whirlpool and spiraled. Like many others before him, he noticed that his navigation devices were malfunctioning. When he eventually made it out of those clouds, he discovered that his flight had only taken 35 minutes. It should have taken 75 in total. Since he had no other reasonable explanation for what he went through, he believed he must have been pushed forward in time. It's not only strange-looking clouds that have been seen above the Bermuda Triangle. In 2014, a pilot recalled almost colliding with a flying object that he could not identify whatsoever. Some of these strange encounters were even caught on tape. It's the case of an early 2015 flight whose passengers noticed a curious object just floating over the ocean. The pilots have yet to figure out what they actually saw back there. Okay, not all of the possible explanations have been this unusual. Oceanographers, for example, have also tried to explain why ships disappear around here. So they recently came back to one of their old theories: rogue waves. These are immense walls of water that just pop up suddenly. If multiple such waves rise simultaneously, they overlap like a wave sandwich. If one single wave can reach over 30 feet tall and happen simultaneously, it can create a rogue wave that can surpass 100 feet high. These types of waves can quickly overtake even the biggest of ships. Meteorologists came up with their own explanation too: hexagonal clouds. These unusual types of clouds can generate winds of up to 170 miles per hour. And they're pretty significant too, some reaching 20 to 55 miles across. As such, waves inside these wind giants can go as high as 45 feet. The Earth's own magnetic force might also have something to do with it. Within the Bermuda Triangle, compasses point to true north, the geographic North Pole, rather than magnetic north, the shifting magnetic North Pole. Some have even explained that since these two perfectly overlap in the Bermuda Triangle, it can cause a magnetic phenomenon that could make navigational devices malfunction. It's called the agonic line. The problem is that scientists have discovered that this line moves each year. It might have passed through the Bermuda Triangle at one point, but it's now through the Gulf of Mexico. Other strange natural phenomenon found along the coast of Norway could help explain why the Bermuda Triangle has claimed so many ships. There are some deep craters there, measuring up to half a mile wide and are 150 feet deep. Scientists believe they were created by methane gas bubbles. This gas seems to be leaking from deposits hidden deep in the seabed. Once the gas reaches a certain quantity, it bursts to the surface and causes eruptions. So, do pilots and ship captains actually avoid this area today? Could this explain why there are fewer ships that get lost there nowadays? But if you've ever flown from Miami to San Juan, Puerto Rico, you probably know that's not true. As for ships, if people would avoid the Bermuda Triangle, nearly all Caribbean vacations would be spoiled. To this day, there are a lot of flights that go over the Bermuda Triangle, so it's clear nobody is avoiding it. This place is one of the most heavily traveled shipping lanes in the world. Nowadays, the Bermuda Triangle has heavy daily traffic, both by sea and air. But the Bermuda Triangle is indeed subject to tropical storms and hurricanes that happen very often. Let's also keep in mind that the Gulf Stream, a strong ocean current that causes sharp changes in local weather, passes through the Bermuda Triangle. Besides, the deepest point in the Atlantic Ocean, the Milwaukee Depth, is also located in the Bermuda Triangle. The Puerto Rico Trench reaches almost 27,500 feet at the Milwaukee Depth. So, if you think about it, the whole mystery is a perfect combination of human error, bad weather, and a lot of ship traffic. This was confirmed by data provided by the U.S. Coast Guard. If you look at percentages, the number of ships or planes that go missing in the Bermuda Triangle isn't different from anywhere else. Disappearances do not happen more often than in any comparable region of the Atlantic Ocean. Official statistics say around 50 ships and 20 airplanes have vanished while traveling through this region. So that's another reason why the total number is so hard to pinpoint. Nobody could describe its rescue in official records if a boat was reported missing. There are also some events that, it turns out, didn't happen at all, adding to those false reports, like that of a plane crash back in 1937 off Daytona Beach, Florida, that local papers surprisingly revealed nothing about.
December 4th, 1970. Pilot Bruce Gurnon had two passengers on board his Beechcraft Bonanza single-engine aircraft, his father and business partner. They took off from Andros Island in the Bahamas and headed northwest for the Florida coast. Sure, they were in the infamous Bermuda Triangle's airspace, but this was a typical flight Bruce had made dozens of times before. The trip usually took about an hour and a half with no hiccups whatsoever. Bruce took off and started gaining altitude. Strange things started happening right from the get-go. At first, he noticed a small cloud up ahead, but it kept growing. Not from the plane getting closer. This thing was actually getting bigger in size. Bruce had to fly through it, and he came out the other end just fine. He gained altitude, and yet another mysterious cloud appeared. This one was massive, and Bruce had no other choice but to fly through it too. At that moment, it got dark as night all around the aircraft. But this wasn't a storm cloud, and it wasn't raining. Bruce was starting to get worried, and then, bam! He saw flashes of white light. Bruce kept flying for another 30 minutes when he realized this was the same cloud he had gone through earlier when he started to climb. But now the cloud was cylindrical, and the plane was flying through its center. It was wide and seemed endless. Bruce thought he could never get out of that trap. But a minute later, he saw light at the end of the tunnel. But all of a sudden, the walls of the cloud tunnel began to narrow. They were closing in on the plane. The navigational instruments started wigging out. The compass was spinning by itself counterclockwise. The walls kept narrowing, smaller and smaller, wrapping like a vortex. The electrical instruments still going haywire. Bruce was running out of time. He had to get out of this place fast. A grueling 20 seconds later, he burst out of this foggy trap. As Bruce described later, he felt weightless for 5 seconds as his plane left the tunnel. The clouds dispersed, and now the aircraft was in a grayish haze. The men let out a big sigh of relief. He immediately grabbed the radio and contacted ground control to determine his location. But when the dispatcher looked at the green screen, his face became contorted with confusion. Bruce's plane wasn't on the radar. It was as if the thing was invisible. But then the dispatcher said the aircraft was already in Miami airspace. Bruce was utterly shocked. It just couldn't be true. Remember, the whole trip usually took around 90 minutes, but this time, it took just 47 minutes to get to the destination. His plane didn't magically gain some supersonic speed beyond the model's limited max cruising speed. This was physically impossible. The dispatcher must have made a mistake. But when the clouds parted, Bruce saw that he really was over Miami. The plane landed safely, and it was time to try and solve this mystery. Bruce checked the remaining fuel and his watch. After a short calculation, he was only more confused. The plane hadn't gone through the amount of fuel it should have. Archive records show that 84 sunspots were recorded that day, as well as a huge solar wind. This would cause disturbances in the Earth's magnetosphere that could throw off the plane's instruments and radars. But so far, no one has been able to explain how the plane got to Miami so fast. Maybe in the future, the truth will be revealed. In the meantime, it remains another mysterious riddle of the Bermuda Triangle.
Wow, poor Titanic just can't get a break. After being destroyed once, now it's going through its second crumbling on the seafloor. Experts think there will be no sign of it left by 2050. Recently, scientists organized a new expedition to Titanic. The thrilling journeys happened in 2021 and 2022. They studied the wreck's archaeology, mapped it, and took an incredible 8,000 images. And they discovered that oceanic forces were consuming Titanic much faster than many other ships. Meanwhile, there are some ships that have been lying underwater for centuries, and they're okay. So why is that? First, like any other shipwreck, Titanic is slowly succumbing to pressure and seawater. Parts of the promenade deck already collapsed. Captain Smith's bathtub is filled with debris because the roof fell on it. The officer's quarter door started to disintegrate as well. The bow is still holding on, buried 60 feet into the mud, just like 25 years ago. But it will also face an inevitable fate one day. Certain structures on the ship could last much longer, maybe for hundreds of years. For example, the thick boilers and reciprocating engines. But lighter elements like railings and wood are doomed. One of the biggest things that can crazily speed up the decay are hungry microbes. The Titanic is being eaten away. It turns out the Titanic has its own specific type of bacteria called Halomonas titanicae, and yes, it's literally named after the ship. This type was discovered in rusticles. That's what you call the rust formations that resemble icicles. They were snacking on the hull of the Titanic, and scientists first stumbled upon them in 2010 during a wreck expedition. These little guys slowly eat away at the steel. They stick to the steel surfaces, causing knob-like mounds of rust to form. These mounds cover the wreck of Titanic, and the porous rusticles then dissolve into fine powder. It's like they're trying to turn the ship into dust. Add the immense water pressure, super cold temperatures, and salt, hence the fast decay. But bacteria isn't the only problem. There are two main things that determine how long a shipwreck might last after sinking. The first one is oxygen, or rather the lack of it. As you go lower and lower in the ocean, the oxygen levels drop significantly. Surprisingly, this really slows down the decay process. Oxygen is very important for life, and if there's none, many organisms just simply don't do well there. Also, some chemical decay processes, like iron rusting, require oxygen. That's why ships that sank in shallower, oxygen-rich waters usually deteriorate much faster. The Titanic did lie in an area with low oxygen levels, and initially, this helped to preserve its structure better. But then it adopted its own type of bacteria like a pet. It turns out that this bacterium loves low oxygen conditions. Who would have thought? There's an interesting reason for that. Most ships throughout history, both above and below the water, were made of wood. This changed in the 1840s when the Industrial Revolution hit. People started making ships out of metals, mostly iron and steel, like Titanic. Finally, they started getting bigger and stronger. Aside from the Titanic, there was also the Lusitania and other luxury ocean liners. At first sight, metal ships are much better. They outlast the wooden ships even underwater. Even though they rust away, they still last tens of times longer than the wooden ships. Decomposing wood is like a feast for animals and microbes searching for organic matter to gobble up. As soon as the wooden ship sinks, they start breaking it down almost immediately. One of the most annoying things was the shipworms. They were named that because they kept eating and burrowing holes in wooden ships. These worms can completely break the wreck down in just 2 years. Of course, this isn't a problem for metal ships, since steel and iron are super hard to digest. So they last a while if they sink in shallow and warm waters, not afraid of the oxygen. But interestingly, this also works the other way around. Metal ships feel bad in deep cold waters. A wooden ship, if sunken very deep, would be relatively fine because no critters munch on it. For example, there are at least 60 known ancient shipwrecks in the Black Sea. Some of them made back in ancient Greece, and they're completely fine. You can literally read the engravings in their planks. One of them is a Greek merchant ship that dates back to more than 2,040 years ago. The rudder, rowing benches, and even the contents of its hold remain perfectly preserved. Now it's known as the oldest intact shipwreck. But in deep cold waters, microbes, like that gobble on Titanic, run on iron. Usually they got this iron from geologic vents on the seafloor, like underwater volcanoes and stuff. But now they also have humans to support their food supply. All this gives us the second crucial factor of decay: materials. Organic materials are the clear losers, especially when exposed to the open ocean. Not just because of the microbes, but also because they're much more delicate than those of ceramic, glass, stone, or metallic origin. For organic matter to survive, being buried is often the best bet. The thing is, fossils that are buried underground are well protected from oxygen and bacteria that contribute the most to the decay. Take for example the Mary Rose, a Tudor ship that sank in the 16th century near England. Many of its wooden structures and artifacts were well preserved, all thanks to being buried in mud. Or the Ship of Gold. This ship sank off the coast of Northern California in 1857. It had a wealth of treasures on it, hence the name. In 1991, a couple of divers stumbled upon a crazy find: a pair of work pants from this ship. The pants are 150 years old, but they survived because they were in a buried and sealed leather chest on the Ship of Gold, so no oxygen or microbes could reach it. The owner of the pants, John Demmett, survived the wreck back in the day, but all his gear sank. The recovered pants fetched over $100,000 at auction in 2022. But even though the Titanic will completely decay, perhaps by 2050, it will have an interesting fate. As mentioned, these shipwrecks rest on some crazy depths, between 9,800 and 20,000 feet. There lies the Abyssal Plain, one of the flattest, most depressingly desolate places on Earth. It's an endless expanse of muddy seafloor. Occasionally, you can find some rocks and boulders here and there. They were once picked up by drifting glaciers. Glaciers calve into icebergs, like those that caused the catastrophe, and the icebergs drop these rocks on the seafloor as they melt. Places like this are scary to humans, but for tiny marine life, they're awesome. This vast, quiet area is home to burrowing worms and other tiny creatures. and one of their favorite places to thrive in are occasional shipwrecks. The Titanic will become their home, a so-called artificial reef. Even after the decay, its structure will provide a substrate for marine life, like a building framework. Such artificial reefs create little unexpected pockets of life in underwater deserts. Coral loves to grow on wrecks, and this creates some structure for little critters to hide and nestle in. The Titanic is already transforming into a vibrant place full of corals and small animals. The images show an amazing variety of life: shrimp, squat lobsters, and even curious rat-tail fish cruising around the site. As a reef, the Titanic will continue to thrive for centuries to come. The researchers are excited about revisiting the Titanic in the future. They'll use advanced sonar and laser scanning technology to survey the wreck site and capture some high-quality photos for a better understanding of the Titanic's condition. They're also curious about how coral grows on shipwrecks compared to other underwater features, such as volcanic reefs. All this will be helpful for marine biology and the shipbuilding industry.
It has recently become a popular location for many tourists looking for the perfect place to get away from it all. If you're lucky enough to catch a sunny day here, it's like no other, I can assure you. Chances are, you'll end up having loads of foggy days, but let's be honest, they have a special allure of their own. This enchanting smile-shaped island is called Sable Island. It's located 190 miles from mainland Nova Scotia. It wasn't accessible to the general public until 2013. That's when it was added to the list of national parks of Canada. You can get here either by plane or by water. But what's so enchanting about this place anyway? There must be something, since the yearly tourist count is growing every year. Firstly, there's a spectacular number of wild horses here. There are between 200 and 500 horses roaming free all over the island. There's also a large population of gray seals. The place is also the only breeding location of a rare bird species called the Ipswich sparrow. If you're already considering a trip here, there are some things you need to know first. Remember that fog I mentioned earlier? Well, it turns out that Sable Island is the foggiest place in the Canadian Maritimes. I'm talking about approximately 127 foggy days each year. During such days, Sable Island literally disappears underneath a thick layer of fog. You won't be able to explore the place on your own either. The local regulations state that visitors need to travel within a group, and they also need to keep a 197-foot distance from the wildlife they can encounter here. As charming as this place may be, it holds a dark secret hidden beneath the sandy dunes, and it has nothing to do with beautiful creatures living here or the island's unique vegetation. Apart from being known from its horses and seals, Sable Island is infamous for an overwhelming number of shipwrecks. Over the years, about 350 ships have ended their lives here, on these sandbars. When survivors described their experiences, they usually mentioned harsh weather conditions near this mysterious island. The island also made its way into literature when it was described in a book called The Perfect Storm, which was written by Sebastian Junger and published in 1997. The book was so successful that it was later adapted for the big screen in 2000, with George Clooney playing the leading role. The first recorded shipwreck near Sable Island dates back to 1583. The boat was named the HMS Delight and was under the command of British adventurer and explorer Sir Humphrey Gilbert. Only 17 people managed to survive the catastrophe by escaping in a small boat. Records mention that they spent 7 days at sea before reaching the shores of Newfoundland. In 1884, another vessel named the Nicosia struggled in the thick fog as well. The ship was completely destroyed, but fortunately, all 18 crew members managed to survive. The captain's son was almost lost at sea when a lifeboat capsized when he was climbing into it. He somehow managed to stay underneath the lifeboat, which was completely submerged. When this lifeboat righted, he eventually emerged from the water and was rescued for the second time. The years between 1947 and 1999 were relatively quiet on the island. In 1999, though, a yacht called the Merrimack ran aground near the shore of the island at about 2 a.m. on July 27th. The 40-foot fiberglass boat had a crew of only 3 people. Natural gas exploration workers, who were luckily not far away, rescued them. The crew managed to fly safely to Halifax the next day. The owner of the Merrimack tried to recover his boat by hiring local fishermen. Unfortunately, this operation was unsuccessful, since only the fittings of the yacht were eventually saved. It took no more than 6 weeks for the sand and waves to crush and completely break up the hull of the Merrimack. So what is it about this place that's so dangerous for boats? Does it have anything to do with the weather? Or maybe there's other forces at play? The explanation turns out to be a bit more complex, and it wasn't easy to figure out, at least not way back in the 1500s. First of all, the island is located close to one of the world's richest fishing grounds. Since it's also near one of the major shipping routes between Europe and North America, hundreds of vessels sail past it each year. The likelihood of shipwreck increases when there are so many boats roaming around the area. Sable Island is also in the way of most of the storms that move up the Atlantic coast of North America. It's no surprise that boats often get hurtled straight onto the shores of this island. The weather has a lot to do with it too. During the summer season, the warm air from the Gulf Stream creates a dense fog as it merges with the cool air by the Labrador Current that passes by the island. Other currents don't help the matter. Sable Island is next to the meeting point of 3 major ocean currents: the Gulf Stream, the Labrador Current, and the Belle Isle Current. Since the 1950s, radars and other modern navigation tools have been used on commercial vessels as well. Up until then, the sextant was the main instrument used to figure out a ship's location. It doesn't mean that sextants weren't accurate, but this instrument couldn't work properly without a clear view of the sun or stars, which means it didn't help much in dense fog, such as the one surrounding Sable Island, or when it was cloudy. Often during bad weather, the captain of a ship navigated, relying on their experiences and intuition based on the ship's speed and direction. That's why most of the survivors in shipwrecks near Sable Island said that the captain had simply miscalculated the ship's position, crashing into Sable Island by accident. This dusty, sandy land is as unfriendly to ships as it is to trees. There's reportedly a single tree on the whole island, and it looks a lot more like a bush. It's actually a pine tree. And since the famous island horses don't see it as much of a food source, it somehow managed to survive. Reports say that the tree was planted back in the 1950s. Local authorities were trying to grow a forest on the island to make it a bit more welcoming. They've planted tens of thousands of trees over the years, more than 69,000 evergreens, 600 fruit trees, and about 55 pounds of pine seeds, along with other plants which could survive the conditions on the island. But they were no match for the extreme weather and sandy soil. Out of all those plants, just one pine tree is still alive. Thanks to its resistance, it has even become a symbol of Sable Island. Interestingly, for around 40 years, the island also had just one inhabitant. Can you imagine that? One person living on a remote island for so many decades? It's the story of a woman called Zoe Lucas. She chose to surround herself with the only residents on the island: the horses, the gray seals, and the many species of birds. An esteemed naturalist, she mentioned in an interview she gave back in 2017 that she was used to living on the island and that she never got lonely. To survive here, she had to put together an essentials kit. It included a notebook to take notes and a pair of binoculars to study the wildlife. You can safely assume she wasn't scared of the intimidating surroundings, since she decided to eventually call this place home. At first, Zoe wanted to set up camp on one end of the island, near some abandoned buildings. But eventually, she settled in a wooden house near a bunch of sand dunes. A Canadian institution called the Meteorological Service of Canada put together the simple construction back in the 1940s. Parks Canada operates the building these days. Zoe's work included gathering as much data on the local horse population as possible. It could help scientists better understand how they managed to adapt to the unfriendly environment. She also helped gather the debris that made it to the shore to help track pollution levels. Among all the rubbish that she collected, there was a refrigerator and a crate full of fresh peppers. Some other specialists eventually started working rotating shifts on Sable Island to offer the brave woman a little bit of company now and then.
Strange things occur in the cold waters of Antarctica. One of these things happened to a ship called Jenny. It was a small schooner whose history began in 1822. The boat and its crew set sail and disappeared a year later. For 18 years, the ship was considered sunk. People forgot about it, but in 1840, the vessel reminded the world of itself. That year, the whaling ship Hope sailed through the Drake Channel in Antarctica. The crew members noticed a ship among icebergs. It was the schooner Jenny. It was floating slowly in the dark, with no signs of life. The captain of the Hope, Mr. Brighton, gave the order to approach the mysterious vessel. They thought it was some creepy ghost ship, but as they came closer, they noticed crew members on the deck. The sailors of the Hope called out to them, but received no answer. This time, it became clear that something terrible had happened to the Jenny. When Brighton boarded, he realized that the Jenny crew members weren't missing. They were here. Frozen people stood like statues. Brighton went down to the lower deck and found the captain. He was sitting frozen at the table, holding a pen. Brighton looked at the logbook. The last record was made on May 4th, 1823. The captain wrote that he was the only living member of the crew. They spent 71 days without food. It seemed that the ship got lost in the sea because its captain went off course or sailed into an iceberg, but no one knew for sure. After that, nobody ever saw the Jenny again. According to rumors, the crew of the Hope abandoned the frozen ship and left it to drift in the cold waters. According to other rumors, this whole story is fiction. The story of the Jenny was described in a German magazine in the middle of the 19th century. Still, there was no further evidence of the ship's existence. Already in our time, Cambridge University decided to explore the case of the Jenny. The researchers discovered that one of the crew members of the Hope, who didn't disclose his name, told someone the legend of the frozen ship. Someone shared the story with another guy, and it was published in a German magazine called Globus. And that's all. There was no other evidence. One of the most famous ghost ships was the Mary Celeste, and there's no doubt about its existence. The history of this vessel was documented in court. People wrote about it in newspapers, but the most exciting thing is that the ship continued to be used even after 10 people disappeared from its deck. The history of the Mary Celeste began in Canada in 1861. When it was first built, the ship was called the Amazon. It changed captains several times, and it also hit some rocks. The boat was sold, bought, then sold again, repaired, and sailed under the name Mary Celeste. In 1872, it had a new captain, Benjamin Briggs. He was a decent, brave man with a lot of experience in navigation. He had a beloved wife, a daughter, and a son. When he went on his last voyage, he took his wife and daughter with him, and his son stayed in America. In November of 1872, the Mary Celeste sailed from the port in New York with 10 people on board and disappeared. 8 days later, another ship, the Dei Gratia, also left New York and followed the same route. Dei Gratia's captain, David Morehouse, noticed the Mary Celeste and immediately realized something was wrong. The ship was moving too freely, as if no one was controlling it. The captain tried to contact the crew members, but no one answered him. Then, together with other sailors, he climbed aboard the Mary Celeste. The ship was in good condition. There was no damage. The hold was slightly filled with water, but it could be easily pumped out. Everything seemed fine, but one lifeboat was missing. The crew members' valuables were in their cabins. The cargo was in the hold. The supplies of water and food were untouched. Judging by the records in the logbook, the ship was caught in a storm, but it was not too strong. Other ships also sailed through this storm, but nothing bad happened to them. The last record was dated November 25th, and it claimed that everything was fine. The sails of the Mary Celeste were slightly damaged, but perhaps it happened after the crew had disappeared. The whole ship was in excellent condition, but what made the people leave it? Part of the crew of the Dei Gratia stayed on board the Mary Celeste to bring it to dry land. Everything went well. They delivered the ship to the closest port. Next, the captain of the Dei Gratia appeared before the court and told about what had happened. However, the prosecutor and the judge didn't want to believe in the story of the Mary Celeste. They were sure the captain got rid of the ship's crew to get money for its cargo. According to the maritime laws of that time, if you found a ghost ship with valuable cargo, then a substantial part of this cargo belonged to you. So, many people thought that David Morehouse decided to earn some money. This version seemed to be more valid than the one about the mysterious disappearance of 10 people. Fortunately, no one accused the captain of committing a crime. They thanked him for his service and gave him a monetary reward. However, his reputation was damaged, which greatly affected his career, as many believed he attacked the crew of the Mary Celeste. But even after this terrible case, trial, and investigation, the story was not over. The Mary Celeste was still an expensive and efficient vessel. It sailed several times, but then one captain crashed it into the reefs to get insurance. The court revealed this deception and accused the captain of intentional property damage. The story of the Mary Celeste became famous all over the world. People began to build their theories, realistic and not. Someone believed the ship had sailed through the Bermuda Triangle, but this version was quickly refuted, as the route of the Mary Celeste passed thousands of miles away from the Bermuda region. Did the Kraken or another giant monster attack the ship? Nope. Since the boat was found in almost perfect condition, there were no signs of a struggle. One of the most popular versions was that the crew of the Mary Celeste stole some valuable cargo and sailed to Spain on the rescue boat. However, those who knew Captain Benjamin Briggs said he was a good, honest man. Besides, he had a son in New York, and Briggs would never leave him. A more thorough investigation revealed that a series of accidental circumstances could have caused the disappearance of the ship's crew. Before its last voyage, the vessel delivered coal. Perhaps the pump intended for pumping water got clogged with coal after that. And when the ship got into a storm, the hold filled with water and the pump broke. The captain couldn't understand the amount of water because numerous barrels in the cargo hold blocked the view. Benjamin Briggs assumed it was dangerous to stay on the ship during a storm, so he evacuated with the passengers on a lifeboat. Perhaps they were close to land and decided to sail there, but the storm intensified and overturned the boat. Also, one record in the log journal said that the chronometer was faulty. It was a device that helped to determine your location at sea using longitude. Briggs got lost and didn't know which way to sail. The storm was strong, and he couldn't determine whether the ship would sink. Perhaps Briggs decided to leave the ship in a rescue boat when he saw the coast of the Azores. The uniqueness of this ghost ship case is that, unlike many others, you can investigate it yourself. There's a lot of information about the Mary Celeste on the internet. There are documentaries and research articles. Perhaps you'll be able to notice something that others haven't seen and solve the mystery.